Hi, can everybody's attention? Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. Can everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And can we please take a moment of silence for Ben Daggett, everyone? Just a moment. Thank you.
So obviously we've had some wonderful successes in the science to celebrate this evening, and so it's a great opportunity for us to see the kind of work that our students are doing, the level of work that our students are doing, and of course celebrate in their success. So the board a number of years ago made the decision to invest some grant funds and some local funds in revamping our science rooms and in creating a research space for our students who wanted to explore science research. That investment has paid off, and we're going to hear a little bit about some of the young people who have taken advantage of that opportunity and really maximized it. So I'm pleased to introduce our science research teacher, Ms. Veronica Aid, who will introduce the students who are going to present a very brief snippets of their projects for us tonight in layman's or laywoman's terms, please. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Rogers, Board of Education, Administration, and the Syosset community. Tonight we get to formally celebrate the accomplishments of the 6 2023 Regeneron Scholars. This year, just under 2,000 students nationwide applied to the Regeneron Science Talent Search, of which 18 of those applicants were from Syosset High School. We put a great deal of emphasis on our robust program, one which we are all very proud of, especially when we get to honor the accomplishments of these 6 students. Syosset High School is honored to have the most scholars on Long Island and tied for the most in New York State, with only one school nationwide with more scholars than us. The 6 students among the top 300 scholars nationwide each will receive a $2,000 scholarship. In addition, the school will receive $2,000 per student to put towards the research program. Tonight, our students will briefly present their projects, and in addition, their posters were on display when you walked in, and they will still be there later this evening. First, we have Sabrina Guo. She researched at Malloy University under the direction of Dr. Alvia Kubarin. Unfortunately, Sabrina can't meet with us tonight, but I have just a brief couple of sentences here. Access to emergency contraception, an essential reproductive health care resource, is limited by barriers to reproductive care such as socioeconomic background. Sabrina's study emphasizes inequities in the U.S.'s reproductive health care system by examining potential relationships between women's use of emergency contraception and their race, educational achievement, and other factors. Data from Sabrina's results could potentially drive public health policies, legislation, and improve access to family planning services among women, especially among the marginalized populations. Our first student presenter tonight will then be Zachary Kam. He conducted his social science research project at Syosset High School under the supervision of Mr. Andrew Manzo and Mr. Brett Klopp.
Imagine having the ability to help fix societal and environmental problems while also making money. Well, in the world of ESG and impact investing, this is a reality. Hi, my name is Zach Kam, and my project was on trends in ESG and impact investing. Well, first of all, what are ESG and impact investments? Impact investments are investments that seek financial gain while also making a positive impact on the world. Last year alone, the market for impact investing grew by more than 40%. Environmental, social, and governance investments, known as ESG investments, are similar in that they take into account ESG factors when investments are made. And ESG assets are projected to surpass $53 trillion by 2025, which is more than 1/3 of all global assets. So due to the increasing prevalence of ESG and impact investing in our global economy, and a lack of research on what actually causes people to engage in such investments, my research sought to find the effect that 4 factors, namely political alignment, means of investment, risk tolerance, and investor experience had on the likelihood of investors to engage in ESG and impact investing. In order to do this, I created a Google form that was sent out to respondents through social media posts and direct solicitation of brokerage houses. In my findings, those on the political left were significantly more likely to engage in ESG and impact investments than those on the political right. Additionally, those who invested through online investment applications were also significantly more likely to consider themselves impact investors and to take into account ESG factors than those who invested through traditional brokerage houses. Finally, and more counterintuitively, those with greater risk tolerance and those with more extensive investor experience were also significantly more likely to make ESG and impact investments. These results are important as the identification of these trends can be leveraged by governments, organizations, and portfolio managers in order to more effectively induce positive world change by more efficiently allocating resources when targeting investors, therefore making the world a better place. Thank you.
Next up, we have Annika Shah. She conducted her social science research project again at Syosset High School under the direction of Mr. Andrew Manzo and Mr. Brett Klopp.
Hi, my name is Annika Shah, and I studied the effects of class-conscious diversity on college campus racial diversity. After reading that many U.S. states had banned affirmative action policies from being used within their college and university systems, I also noticed that minority student populations at many public universities had been decreasing as a result. In order to determine a method for these colleges and universities to use to increase the representation of low-income and minority students without violating the state legislation, I first compared the racial diversity index scores of test-optional colleges, which are colleges that do not require the submission of standardized test scores to apply, test mandatory colleges, which do require the submission of standardized test scores, and the diversity of the states that they are located in. And I found that the test optional policy results in an increased representation of minority and socioeconomically disadvantaged students, as when colleges utilize the test optional policy, they better reflect state demographics. In the top graph, the red represents the diversity of test-optional schools, and the blue represents the diversity of the states that they are located in, and both line up in terms of racial diversity index scores. I also compared the socioeconomic diversity scores and the racial diversity scores of 100 public universities in order to determine if taking socioeconomic status into consideration during the admissions process would indirectly increase racial diversity. And I found that colleges that are racially diverse are also socioeconomically diverse, which proved my hypothesis correct. In the bottom graph, the green represents racial diversity index scores, and the yellow represents socioeconomic diversity index scores, and both line up in terms of their diversity index scores. My research proves that when colleges embrace the test optional policy and take socioeconomic status into consideration during the admissions process, we can create more opportunities for low-income and minority students to have upward mobility. And these are my references. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Vivek Tarakia. He did a science research project at Syosset High School under the supervision of Dr. Mary Hendrickson, Miss Olivia LaRocca, and Mr. Thomas Allen.
Hi everyone, my name is Vivek Tarakia, and did you know that in 2022 there were 90,000 new diagnoses of Parkinson's disease, which was 50% more than what was expected? Now, with no development of a cure for Parkinson's disease in the foreseeable future, the most effective way of flattening this curve would be through identifying environmental factors that have the ability to catalyze the onset of Parkinson's disease and limiting the exposure of our general public to these environmental factors. So looking into one of these environmental factors is exactly what I did in my study, where I specifically investigated a prominent flame retardant chemical called aluminum hydroxide. So aluminum hydroxide can be found in many aspects of normal household. It can be found in wall insulation, furniture, and even children's toys. And through my secondary research, I found that there was a significant data gap in the neurotoxic potential of aluminum hydroxide, particularly relating to its ability to induce Parkinson's disease in a living organism. So I investigated this data gap using a model worm organism, where I exposed the model worm to aluminum hydroxide for a 24-hour time period, during which I monitored the dopamine neuron levels of the worm, as well as the alpha-synuclein protein levels, both of which are key biological indicators of Parkinson's disease. So after the 24-hour period, I noticed that there was a significant degeneration of the dopamine neurons in the model worm and a significant aggregation of the alpha-synuclein proteins, both of which insinuate that the aluminum hydroxide chemical has the ability to induce Parkinson's disease in a living organism. So given the fact that all of my assays produced positive results, I was able to conclude that aluminum hydroxide has the potential to induce Parkinson's disease in a living organism, which can be particularly detrimental to the countless individuals across the globe that are living in its constant presence. So here are my references, and thank you.
Next up, we have Alex Wang. He conducted his research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the Research Science Institute under the supervision of Dr. Ariel First.
So before I start, can I get a show of hands of how many people have had at least one cup of coffee today? Okay, so how does this connect to this weird gold leaf electrode system? Well, basically, the answer is that a cup of coffee costs about as much as this gold leaf system. So what is this? Well, basically, what I did was I created these electrodes which can act as a rapid sensor for basically any disease that you choose. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with COVID rapid tests. Well, this is basically the same thing, but you can choose your disease. So it functions by basically using base pair matching, which is similar to how you might have a lock and a key. I choose to design the lock, and if the key or the disease that we're looking for exists, we actually get a fitting of that lock and key model, which results in an overall detection of the disease. So the overall cost for this system costs about $3, and we can build lots and lots of these systems on the same chip. What this means is that we can actually detect multiple diseases at the same time. So right now, I have a 2-electrode and a 4-electrode system. This means that even though I only worked on tuberculosis and influenza, I'm able to detect 4 different diseases or 4 different strains of the same disease at the same time. This is useful because in a lot of low resource settings which require these diseases and these diagnostic devices, people aren't able to access these simple systems. This could reduce the spread of lots of diseases, and therefore by improving our current systems and providing affordable and reliable overall detection devices, we can improve health outcomes across the world. Thank you.
Next up is Tianyi Zheng. She did her social science research at Syosset High School under the direction of Mr. Manzo and Mr. Klopp.
Hi, my name is Tina Zhang, and I'm passionate about learning different languages. So that's why I did my research on linguistics. It has been long assumed that relations between word sounds and meanings were arbitrary. However, recent studies have shown that this might not be the case. And this non-arbitrary relation is otherwise known as sound symbolism, defined as a non-random connection between the phonetics or sounds of a word and their meanings. And I specifically focused on 2 types of sound symbolism, imitative and corporeal. And I wanted to look behind why sound symbolism exists. So I specifically looked at whether sound symbolic words tend to contain more corresponding consonants than non-sound symbolic words across this specific Indo-European language family group. I was actually able to find a significant difference between the consonant correspondences of sound symbolic words and non-sound symbolic words. And this current study could advance the understanding of word and sound relations and also just yield implications on second language learning, because sound symbolic words have been shown to facilitate second language learning by infants. These are my selected references, and thank you.
So that is our 6 scholars that we have this year. Thank you.
On behalf of the board, I want to congratulate our 6 finalists, but I want to point a couple of things out with them. As you saw them come up, they're such eloquent speakers. They worked really hard. They have great personalities. And one thing that I want to point out is, yes, we have hardworking students. Yes, they're smart, but our students are the complete package because they also have, they're caring, they're compassionate, they have the right moral compass. And I think that's really important, that it's not just I understand the science, but what am I doing this for, and I care. So I want to commend you guys on that. Plus, they're just great kids. The other point I wanted to make, and I think Dr. Rogers said we had 525 kids in the Regeneron program that were in the new lab, in the research program. And I also want to thank our previous board because they had the hindsight or the foresight to invest in our own lab where the students can stay here and do the research. And I think that's important. So I think this was a smart investment, and obviously it paid off. So thank you. And thank you guys, and good luck, and hopefully you guys will win. $25,000, correct? Oh, they announced it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right, we're going to just set up on the board. I did not know. Sorry. My fault.
Yes. Unfortunately, our students aren't moving on to the next round, but in the point that I made in the Friday update is our job is to build a program. Students will take that opportunity as far as they can and as far as their hard work will carry them. But the reward is knowing that we prepared 18 students so well that they had competition-worthy projects. Some will win, some won't. But this is like having a cross-country team where every kid can run faster than a 6-minute mile. One kid's going to win because that's the way races work. But every kid who reached their best is a winner. So we're proud of this program. We're proud of these young people. And this Regeneron is a single competition, but it exists in a department that competes in a number of different ways, and we're actually going to hear about some other success in that department from one of our newest employees, our coordinator of science, Ms. Jill Johansson.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, Dr. Curry, and the rest of our administration and the community that's here with us this evening. It is my great pleasure to share with you the phenomenal success of one of our extracurriculars at the high school, the Science Olympiad team. They have had tremendous success so far this year. For those of you who aren't very familiar, and here I'll quote from the Science Olympiad website, this is a premier team STEM competition in the United States, and it provides standards-based challenges to 6,000 teams at 425 tournaments in all 50 states in the nation. Syosset students earn their spots on our Science Olympiad team by applying and taking tests, and then once they're chosen, they compete in subject-specific events at several weekend competitions. This year, Syosset's team was named the highest-ranking New York team in 6 of the competitions that they've attended, with teams from all over the United States, including even in Hawaii, teams from Hawaii. Those competitions were at Cornell, in Lake Erie, in Fayetteville, Manlius, in Albany, and at MIT, and at Harvard. Recently, we hosted the regional, the Long Island Regional event at Syosset High School on January 28th, and our team came in first for the 12th year in a row. And to date, we have won 239 medals, and based on our stellar performance, we will be competing at the state level in March with the hope of qualifying for the nationals. So there are over 45 students in our Science Olympiad team, and tonight we'd like to recognize 5 of the representatives with a certificate of commendation for their exemplary leadership on their Science Olympiad team. Ms. Castaneda, who's the team's mentor, was unable to attend this evening. However, she wanted me to share with you that the following students are exemplary leaders on the team. She describes them as enthusiastic, detail-oriented, multitasking helpers, and they are the soul of the team. We are very, very proud of them, and I'd like to call their names and have them come up for a certificate and then to take a picture. So first we have Alex Chen. There you go, Alex. And then Darius Fan. Simone Lim. Ishan Patel. And Anthony Rodriguez. Congratulations to all 5 of you. We are very proud.
In case you haven't figured it out, this month's theme is science. So we're going to have a presentation to the board on science and technology, but before we do that, we're just going to take a couple of minutes to reset the auditorium. So once again, a round of applause for all of our winners on the Science Olympiad team and in the Regeneron competition.
Okay, we're going to get started. Dr. Rufo? Will you give us your first part of the budget preview, please? Thank you.
Just before Dr. Rufo gets started, I'll set some context for this conversation. Over the course of the last several years, all school districts have dealt with some extraordinary challenges, obviously the most notable among them being the pandemic and managing workforces and budgets through uncertainty about state aid and revenues, uncertainty about the economy. The good news is that many of the things that we feared may come to pass during the pandemic didn't. But as we're exiting the pandemic now, we're finding that the challenge facing all school districts is how school spending is tied to inflation, but how the revenue side of the budget is very constrained. So that is going to put all school districts in different versions of the same conundrum, which is trying to preserve program while dealing with the reality of costs that have gone up faster than revenues can rise to meet them. So a lot of this conversation over the course of the next several meetings will be talking about the work that we're doing to keep our budget in balance and the effort that we're making to close some of the gaps that have been opened up by inflation. And as we go through each of the sections of the budget, Dr. Rufo will pay particular attention to the areas in the budget that are tied most closely to inflation and therefore over which we have the least amount of control. So I don't mean to start us off on a somber note, but I thought it was important for us to have shared context for what this spring is going to look like. So Dr. Rufo?
Thank you. And good evening. And so tonight is the first discussion that we'll have on the 23-24 budget, followed by subsequent discussions each month leading up to the May 16th budget vote. And tonight I'm going to present the preliminary tax cap for 23-24, a preliminary look at the capital codes and the administrative codes, and then the first look at our state aid. The executive proposal was released last week. So when we formulate a budget, we want to ensure that it's properly aligned to our goals and that it has a multi-year focus to ensure that it's sustainable. So for 23-24, our budget goal is to continue the programs and preserve the programs and services for our students, to continue our investment in instructional technology. Over the last, I guess, decade, we've been working on our facilities, so we want to continue doing that work to upgrade and enhance our facilities. The last couple of years, we've added staff to support our students' social and emotional well-being, and we can intend, or certainly our goal, is to continue that in the next school year. We're managing our recent enrollment growth, and we want to accomplish all of these goals in light of the fiscal constraints that we're under, and including the record levels of inflation. And we want to ensure the fiscal stability, again, not just this year, but in subsequent years. We always want to have a multi-year approach to our budgeting. So this graphic, I hope that it makes a bit clear the factors that are driving the budget. And every year there's some factors that are pushing up and some factors where we're getting some relief and there are some declines. So you can see by this graphic there's a lot more, there are a lot more factors putting upwards pressure on the budget this year. So we do have some reductions that we're anticipating in debt service as we have an issue, an old debt issue that is rolling off. We have some reductions in some non-instructional operating expenses. On the increasing side, we have a significant increase in health insurance premium that actually came into being this year, and we're anticipating another estimate, significant increase next year. We've had staffing increases due to enrollment. We are projecting an increase in our TAN's borrowing cost, and we've had a higher interest rate than we had in our budget for this year as well. Our transportation line item is going up, and again, we have those inflationary cost increases, such as transportation. Those contracts are tied to the inflation rate, and those are state contracts for transportation. So just to give you a sense of the magnitude, this is a chart from the Comptroller's Office, and sorry if you can't see it, but in the bottom right-hand side, with the red circles around, shows what the allowable levy growth factor, and this goes into the tax cap formula, for school districts who have a July 1 to June 30th fiscal year, have been capped at the 2% allowable growth factor, when in 2022 inflation grew at 4.7 and 2023 8%. So clearly our increases have been nowhere near that, but we are certainly feeling the pressure. This slide shows where the district has been since the inception of the tax cap in the 12-13 school year. The first column is the amount of applying the tax cap calculation with our factors. The second column to the right is the actual tax levy that was put forth by the district. And you can see in all years, the district has been below that cap, which means we have never exhausted the full amount of our tax levy. So while we're still deep in the budget process, it's hard to imagine a scenario that doesn't have us right up against that cap, where staffing discussions are underway and those meetings are starting. I'm not going to go too in detail of the tax cap formula. You've seen it before, but essentially the tax cap works. I'll go to the next slide where it is our actual numbers. You start with the prior year's levy. There's a tax-based growth factor that's given to us by New York State, which represents growth in the district in housing. And then you have the ins and outs of pilots and your capital exclusions. And that is the amount. The adjusted prior year levy is what the 2% or the lesser of inflation, or 2%, is applied to get to your tax levy limit, and then you add your estimated coming year exemptions, essentially your capital. And right now, although this is not final, we're at about a 3.08 tax cap. However, there's an important component of that we're working on, and that's our final building aid number. And as we go through the final projects that we have to submit to the state, it's likely that that amount will come down as we account for that additional building aid. Again, this is too small to read, but it's a screenshot from the New York State Comptroller. On March 1st, OSC established the deadline for submitting the tax cap, and that is the calculated cap. And they also now, I guess it was 3 years ago, they started requiring you to put in what you thought was your estimated levy, where you're going to be over or under the cap, and what's an approximation of your levy. Well, in fact, the Board of Education doesn't adopt the budget until April, and the property tax report card is submitted to the state. However, OSC releases the preliminary data for the tax cap before it's adopted by you and filed. So what I've done in the last several years is, because we're still working on the budget, I will wind up putting the number in that it comes right up to the cap until we know more information. This form is final after the board adopts the budget and the property tax report card is submitted in April. But I wanted to make you aware of that because they do release those numbers. So we're going to go first through the capital section of the budget. So the capital section makes up about 14% of the district's overall budget. It includes operations, which is maintenance, operations, maintenance, security. So that includes our custodial teams, our utilities for all of the buildings, our maintenance team, our groundskeepers, and then a variety of projects that we do, repair projects and smaller capital projects. Security is included in here in this component of the budget, as well as debt service and the transfer to capital line. These aren't our choices. This is what how the state organizes this three-part budget. And just before we go through it, just a really quick overview of how the coding works. Schools are organized, or the chart of accounts is organized by function, and then within that there are object codes. So anything with a 100 is a salary code, 200s are equipment, 400 is contractual, or things that we buy from others. We don't do it in their contractors. So that's an easy way to remember it. And 500 is supplies. So supplies are more disposable type of things from year to year versus equipment, which is longer term. So the capital codes overall, you can see, are expected to increase by about 1.8 million, or approximately 6%. So several factors are driving this. And if you look up at the top, the first is the 23-24 compared to this year's budget, the dollar, then the percent change in the columns, and then 3 years of actual expenditures, and then the estimated FTEs. So the increase here, if you look at that third column, is driven by several factors. One is an increase in the capital projects fund, and then an increase in the operations of plant, and it's partial. And then you can see there's also a significant increase in the tax anticipation notes, the fourth item down, and these are partially offset by declines in both our debt service and then security. And I'll go into them in more specifics. So custodial operations, this contains custodians for our 10 buildings, the cost for the staffing, for cleaning and custodial services, as well as district-wide costs for utilities and supplies and equipment for the buildings. So the increase, you can see that's about 465,000, or 4.2, is the result of several factors, including higher allocations for contractual services. That's the 400 code that's maybe a third way down the page. We're also projecting an increase in electricity expense based on what we're seeing in our current consumption, and we also have an increase in contractual salary adjustments. So we use the U.S. EAI short-term energy forecasts, which are pretty much showing declines in utility prices for 24 after a pretty significant increase that we're seeing in the current year. We also then speak with PSC&G, our local people, just to make sure that there isn't any local circumstances that are happening that might be moving in a different direction. And of course, the severe weather, global events impacting supply chain and production are always potentially there to cause some volatility in prices. You can see that the budget shows a decline in fuel oil. You may recall one of our capital projects was removing the fuel oil tanks at the schools. And our natural gas line is also lower, reflecting expenditure trends and, again, anticipated decrease in pricing. Security contains all expenses for district-wide security. It's our in-house staff, our contracted staff, as well as any security infrastructure. Over the last several years, we certainly have experienced increases, and you can look at the actuals and see that increase in the presence of both in-house and contracted guards. And the decrease for next year doesn't represent a diminishment of our security services. It's really just it's an adjustment for actual expenditures, a reduction in contracted, a little bit more in in-house, as well as the roll-off of some projects we were doing with locks through and surveillance equipment through BOCES. The next category is maintenance. And this includes our maintenance workers and our groundskeepers. And the codes increased by about $163,000 or 2.5%, mostly in the area of contractual services, as well as contractual salary adjustments. So a preliminary list, at this point in time, the equipment list is preliminary, the projects are preliminary, but this is a starting point, and they may require adjustment as we advance through the budget. But let's just look at the equipment that's currently included in the budget: HVAC equipment, HBT library furniture, which is phase 1 of a 2-year planned project, high school courtyard furniture, playground equipment for Village, a new gym curtains for Southwoods and HBT, and some replacement maintenance equipment. So if you look up here, you can see there's a halfway down 400 contractual services, an increase of about 200,000. And to the left, the box on the left shows the contractual services that are, I would say, more routine, done on a routine basis, and the box on the right would show projects that are probably accounting or are accounting for that variance. So these are projects that we're doing through the budget. And for years, as part of our maintenance plan, we've always done a portion of our capital projects through the maintenance budget, and that's our plan for the coming year. One of the other ways that districts are able to fund capital project is through the transfer to capital line. So this line shows about a $1.6 million, 1.6 million or 53% increase for projects. And those are the planned projects that we're looking at right now. And again, this is preliminary. So it includes the South Grove roofing and masonry project, dust collection systems for both HBT and the high school, and then district-wide roofing repair and masonry and paving. In the other slide, you saw the equipment for the library redesign at HBT. This is more of the capital work to do that redesign, as well as the high school courtyard. This is the capital side of that work. And just while we're talking, I just want to expand a little bit more on the different ways that school districts can accomplish capital projects. So we talked about some of them being part of the maintenance budget, and you saw that. We also have the transfer to capital fund, and those would be somewhat larger projects that are rather than those that are included as part of the maintenance budget. And one of the reasons we want to do them either as part of the maintenance budget or through the transfer to capital fund is that ultimately it does save us on borrowing costs. So for those projects that can fit within the budget, we have chosen that as an option. We also, the district has used all these different forms to finance all of the capital work that we've done over probably 8 or 9 years. So we've also used our capital reserve, and using the capital reserve requires a separate proposition, both to establish the reserve and then to use the reserve. And it can be used for any projects that were part of the resolution that established the capital reserve, and typically you would do larger scale projects as part of this. And the resolution also contains parameters on the time frame and the funding limits when you're putting money into the reserve. And then the last item is the bond issue, which is done as a separate proposition typically always the largest scale projects, and these projects are financed through the issuance of bonds, and then the district pays the principal and the interest payments as part of its debt service line in the budget. And this is just an example of, since 2016, up at the top just shows how the district has managed to complete a variety of different projects using these different mechanisms. So we've used the transfer to capital reserve funding in the next section, and then bond funding for all of the different projects, as well as the individual projects that are done through the maintenance budget. And the considerations that help determine where you might do one particular capital project versus another depends on the scale of the project, the borrowing costs. When we did our borrowing costs on our two recent debt issues, we had very favorable interest rates of 1.99 and 1.66. It's unlikely that we would see those rates in the near future. One of the other considerations is the building aid ratio. So while interest rates are higher, good news is our building aid ratio has increased. So from, on the left-hand red circle, from 24% in 18-19 all the way up to almost 41% in the current school year. So this means for those projects, the proportion that is aidable, that gets applied at 40% rather than 25%. So that's good news for us too. The other factor is the timing of the debt and the impact that it has on the tax levy and the tax cap. So I'm moving on now to just our debt service, and up at the top is the estimate of debt service for the 23-24 school year, which is a decline of about $1 million. And that represents a bond issue. I think it was from 2005, and then it was refinanced in 2013, and so a portion of that is rolling off, and you can see that decline from this year to next. And one of the ways that districts use is this rolling of debt service, and ensuring, or trying to ensure, that when one project rolls off, another one can come on if there's a need to do capital work. And that way, it keeps and as you can see from that chart, as you go out past 2023, you can see how it sort of levels off to where it was before. And that helps keep the tax levy more stable. And so what's presented on that chart on the bottom, or the brown, is the old debt service, and you can see that coming off and being replaced with the new debt service, which is in the blue. And up at the way top is the energy performance contract, and that debt is different because it's structured differently, so that cost savings from the utilities and from the energy efficiencies are required to offset the debt service, and that is the way those projects are structured and approved by the state. So tax anticipation notes is the final code in the capital section. So tax anticipation notes are issued by the district to as a cash flow mechanism. So the district has obligations beginning July 1st, and the district gets its tax revenues not until November, December. So therefore, there has to be a way to finance those required expenses, and the tax anticipation note is the mechanism for doing that. And it's a year note, and we borrow in consulting with our bond counsel and with our fiscal advisor as they review our cash flow statements to ensure that we only borrow as much as is needed. So the significant increase, about $855,000, is due to interest rates. So the estimate that's in there at this point is for $30 million, which is the amount that we borrowed this year, at 5.25%. Now, I had a conversation over the weekend with our fiscal advisor in hopes that Rates are stabilizing, but they're still going up, and so they are monitoring those rates, and we'll see where that goes as we progress in the budget process. Okay, the administration section of the budget accounts for about 9.6% of the budget. And on the right are the different areas that comprise the administration section. It's not just administrators, it is legal costs, public relations costs, auditing, insurance, the required services that districts have to operate. So overall, the administrative codes account, there's a 2.98% increase, 571,000. Some of that is contractual expenses. The largest increase is insurance, and I want to just jump to that. So liability insurance, that first box, has an increase of 190, almost 16%. And so we met with our NYSER, who's our insurance carrier, officials, and representatives, and they went through the different reasons for why they're anticipating a 15% increase. So they're seeing a significant increase in claims activities, particularly related to CVA cases. They are also seeing increases in both numbers and the amounts of settlements, and those are really the primary market forces driving this increase. So we'll be in communication, and just to point out, this is not a situation for Syosset, that Syosset is experiencing an increase in volume. Their exposure is just increased with all of their clients. BOCES also has a material increase, about 8% on the admin fee and 7.4% on the capital expense, and this represents the charge that Nassau BOCES charges to its component or shares among its component districts. And ours really reflects some inflationary cost increases for BOCES, as well as the increase in our enrollment that gives us a greater proportionate share of that. We have an increase in supervision of about almost 4%, and some of that is related, well, it's all related to contractual salary increases, as well as the expansion of the elementary principal day going from 10-month year to a 12-month year. I would now draw your attention to the bottom box, and you can see that there's a decrease of about 220,000. And I'm sure you're aware that the district has been using the Teachers College professional development model for a number of years. And at this point, the district has built a substantial amount of internal capacity. And over the last couple of years, we've been going to outside consultants for that service, and this reflects using internal folks who are trained to provide that service, and that would save $220,000. So it's continuing the program, but with our internal staff. So as usually I do revenue in March, but I just wanted to, this came out last week. We're still looking at all of the details and formulas, but I wanted to just share where we were. So the biggest news that you can see is the increase, and if you look at the first line of foundation aid, it's up by almost $8 million, which is great news for us. This is not unanticipated, because we have been over the last 3 years have been seeing increases. While it is important to note that state aid this year makes up 10% of the district's budget. So while we're absolutely very happy to have this, and this will help us manage through those significant increases that we're seeing in some lines, it's just important to understand just the magnitude in terms of the percent that makes up for the district's budget. The other good news is next year will represent our third year of the UPK program. I think I might have the dates a little bit. I think 21-22 was our first year. And you can see that the number went up significantly. We started with 90, let me just see. Our first year, we started with 119 slots, and then it went up this year to 197, and that amount, that 1.67, reflects the addition of 112 seats. So that is good news as well. And then next month, we'll be doing the bulk of the district's budget, which is in the program or the instructional component of the budget. We'll go through the rest. We'll give an update on state aid as well as the rest of the revenue items. We'll have any updates to the admin and capital codes that we went through tonight. And then, like I said, we're still working through building aid and some other pieces of the tax cap component, so I'll give an update on that as well.
So thank you, Dr. Rufo. I'll just draw the board's attention to a handful of high points from the presentation. The first, as Dr. Rufo said, just the district has had a long-term capital strategy. So when I arrived in 2014, the board and I undertook a building condition survey so that we would have a sense of the condition of the facilities. Syosset had, at the time, deferred a lot of maintenance over a fairly substantial period of time. And that deferred maintenance produced pretty daunting backlog of capital work that needed to be done. And recognizing, obviously, that it would be challenging to underwrite the cost of all of that through some sort of borrowing and then subject the district to a lot of interest costs, we came up with a plan that essentially broke it into what we called at the time 3 buckets. Bucket number 1 was obviously to do some through borrowing, the larger projects. Bucket number 2 was to find any maintenance work that we could do and incorporate into the energy performance contract, which is then self-financing, would be something that we wouldn't have to finance through the district. And then lastly, to try and do as much of the work through the transfer to capital and annual maintenance budget as possible, that particularly with the annual maintenance budget, because we're using in-house labor, the labor costs are already paid for, and so it's the least expensive way possible to do this work because we already have the labor costs in the budget. And that's the strategy that we've been pursuing here since 2015, and we've addressed, and Dr. Rufo's summary slide shows how much of that accumulated backlog of work we've accomplished. But the district is coming up on a second round of building condition surveys that are going to spark new conversations about additional work that needs to be done because these facilities are aging and because there had been such a long period of time when major work had not been addressed by the district. So we'll be constantly in sort of a catch-up mode, I think probably for at least another decade or so until we kind of work through the backlog. So that's one important thing. The second is the district had some hopes for some spending initiatives that we thought would improve the classroom environment. You'll recall in September we had a presentation on marrying some state grant funds with some local funds to try and create a model classroom in the high school. We're still pursuing those state grant funds for the technology side of it, but we're going to defer the purchase of the furniture until the fiscal condition improves a little bit. And obviously there are a whole bunch of costs in the budget that are just super sensitive to inflation. And I just want to, again, go through them just to tick off on my fingers. The first is transportation. The way the state law works, if you allow the transportation contract to go up at the rate of inflation, you don't have to rebid transportation. We're leery of rebidding transportation because the last time we rebid transportation, The bid came in 14% above what we were already paying. And so as uncomfortable as accommodating inflation would be, we still think that it's preferable to taking the risk of bidding transportation. The second is, of course, interest costs directly on the borrowing that we need to do to cover short-term cash flow problems. The third is the healthcare insurance. Oddly, the state's health insurance program operates on a calendar year basis. The school district operates on a July to June basis. So half of the cost for health insurance appears in the current fiscal year, and then in the second half of the year, we get the first half of the new state insurance year. So we planned aggressively for a large increase. I think we put 10% into the budget, but the state's increase passed along to us was more on the order of 15%. So at present, we don't see an increase in pension costs, but anticipating that the weakness in the equities market will impact the rate of return that is experienced by the state's two major pension systems that we participate in, TRS for teachers and administrators and ERS for civil service employees. We should anticipate that at some point that will be a cost that we have to accommodate. And then lastly, as Dr. Rufo said, our insurance carrier is experiencing losses across all their clients, and so of course they pass that along to all of their clients in the form of premium cost increases. So these are challenges that every school district faces, because every school district is subject to the same rules that we are, and we have to continue to maintain these facilities because they're the only ones we've got, and we have to find a way to preserve the program, because the program is what we're proudest of and what we had a chance to celebrate earlier tonight. But as I started the conversation, this is going to be a challenging budget year. It's going to require some difficult choices for us, and as Dr. Rufo said, she has a list of goals. Our goal is to preserve as much of our program as we possibly can, continue to maintain that physical plant, and set ourselves up for long-term success with a budget plan that is not short-sighted but looks down the road for multiple years to come, so that we don't accumulate problems in the current year and inherit them in the subsequent year. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rufo. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Rufo? Brian?
Thank you, Dr. Rufo. I have three questions. I'll try to be short. The first is on the TANs. We have $30 million at 5.25 is what we're projecting, and I think you said that's about $800,000 more for the year. Obviously, we don't have flexibility on interest rate, but is there any flexibility on the $30 million number? In other words, have we been overly cautious with that number? We're maybe trimming it, or is it tied to something else that we have no flexibility? My second question is about electricity. Obviously, it's almost $300,000 increase with PSEG, or PSEG. I guess my question is there any, since it's a $2 million a year bill, is there any flat rate or hedging strategies that we can implement that may not help this year but may help in the future? And then I guess my last question is related to insurance. And Dr. Rogers, you just mentioned this. The increase in insurance is not based on Syosset. It's obviously based on the pool itself of all districts. And I guess my question is there anything we can do? Sometimes you put a sign outside that says, shoes and sneakers are mandatory, and you get a lower premium for slip and fall. Just some creative way to knock our premium down. I know that's a lot, and I apologize. And my example was terrible.
Thank you for the questions. Let me start with the last one. The nicer increases, as we said, are across the board for all districts. They gave that to all of us during a meeting with business officials. They also, on an ongoing basis, reach out to the district and have training programs that the district participates in. I believe Mr. Hamilton went around with the nicer representative, I want to say fairly in the last year or two, and they go around and they look at your operations and they looking for, I'm not going to say hazards, but things that could be improved to tighten. So we do participate with them, and they are a partner with school districts. So they certainly will make us aware of things that we can do, should be doing, things we should be looking at to lower incidences.
Dr. Rufo, before you leave that
Yep.
question, I'd just add two other things to it. About 4 years ago, I believe the district rebid insurance. We were with a different carrier at the time, and that rebid did save the district about $500,000 a year in premiums by going to NYSER. So even though this premium increase is uncomfortable, it's still considerably less than what we had been paying beforehand. And then the second, your example actually not so far off. And while we did walk the facilities with NYSER to see through their eyes if there were places where we could make the facilities safer, one of the things that has remained in the capital budget is paving projects. And while paving projects are not glamorous, they literally are the antidote to slip and falls, because you don't want uneven pavement tripping somebody up who's maybe looking at a phone and not looking at their feet. So, we're going to try and maintain that in there so that we protect people from exactly that kind of accident.
And then your second question, I just consulted Mr. Hamilton, that there is not a flat rate or for electricity. Was that a two-part question, or was there another part to that, the electricity question?
You work with the fiscal advisors on cash flow in order to know how much to borrow for the TANs?
Oh, I didn't get to the TANs yet, but I meant if there was a part two to the electricity.
I guess my question was, is it flat rate, or is it something we should be looking into maybe long-term for hedging, since this is a $2 million annual number? If it's going to stay $2 million and up going forward, is there a way we can flatten it? Maybe not get a flat rate, but lock in a rate at some point. But this would be for the future, not for now.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something we'll look into, but that's not our understanding. But Mr. Hamilton's in discussion. He talks to our representative often, so he'll check in on that. Regarding the TANs, so as I said during the budget presentation, the TANs are done in consultation with our fiscal advisor, and one of the documents that they ask us for, of course, is our cash flow. And so your cash flow, for those that don't know, is your statement of inflows and outflows, your items for your cash to determine how much cash you need at any point. So that is something that is highly scrutinized both by our fiscal advisor and bond counsel, because they're all rules, arbitrage rules about how much you can borrow. So the amount that we borrow, what we need, so I can't say that, that 30 million, typically if your budget goes up in a given year, you might anticipate an increase, all else being equal, in your TANs borrowing. We also have the situation this year of I think we said 29 million in the budget for this year is what we estimated at the time, but then our number was a little bit, so we're actually 129 because of interest rates, and we were 29, we actually came in at 30, are over budget in TANs. So we do our best estimate of cash flow. We don't have a lot built into it in terms of we are conservative, because we certainly want to ensure that we have cash available to pay our legal obligations.
Lynn?
Sorry, I just want to clarify something, and if I'm overstepping, let me know, but I think Brian meant is kind of like for insurance, like if you have car insurance, you take defensive driving, you can lower it. Is there something like, am I wrong? Is that what you kind of meant? Like there's signage or something we can look at as to look at for that, or is there a way they can look at SIAS specifically and our incidences and do a specific rate?
Sure. They do look at, when we do our renewal process each year, which is an extensive process where they will look at, They will look at our number of vehicles, the number of people who are using our vehicle, just to go on with the, the example of the defensive driving. And they will produce rates that are Syosset specific. So the 15 is sort of the broad rate of what they're seeing in the market, and then during the renewal. And they're telling you that so that you can put it into your budget. And I guess beyond what we've already stated about talking about ensuring that one of the most important things, you're keeping your facilities up, and and little workshops that they offer that I attend, that Mr. Hamilton attends. We do that. The defensive driving, that's something specific. We could speak to them about that.
Anyone else? Jack? Shawnee?
So in the operations plan, there's 40% decrease in water, and gas also is going down. You explained why the fuel is going down, but is that realistic?
Yeah, it's interesting. The water we took down, and if you look at the actuals, you can see that we have not spent that much on water. And we're waiting back from council on confirmation. There was an allocation held in that water line. There was a court case. Nassau County was attempting to, at the time, pass off a sewer, I'm going to call it a sewer tax, to school districts and other municipalities, that in 2019 or 20 there was a decision, and then there was potentially an appeal. So we have to. So we brought it down as a reflection of actuals, and might be able to bring it down once we have confirmation that this is, we don't need to be saving this for the potential tax, sewer tax.
Right, and I'm in the same group of line items. It's interesting that electricity is the only commodity that's increasing. Do we know if it's a result of higher kilowatt hours or just prices? And
prices this year, I'm sorry, finish your question.
It's all right.
It is really an adjustment to actuals this year, where we experienced a significant increase in kilowatt hours. I'm sorry, in the price. And so that's really what that reflects, because in 2024, they think that it's going to go down a little bit. But we're adjusting to our actual expenditures. The rate increase this year is what's driving that.
So one of the thoughts, and I just wanted to piggyback on something that I think Brian was talking about in relation to the account. If we are considering additional facility improvements, as Dr. Rogers just outlined, potentially there are efficiency, green, LEED, all kinds of HERS-rated savings programs that are both federally funded and state matched related to efficiency. So in principle, there's hopefully something that we can work with PSEG on taking into account around future facility construction.
Yeah, we would be enthusiastic about pursuing any of that. I know some school districts will do serial energy performance contracts. They'll do one contract, and then after that contract is completed, find other efficiencies and perform another energy performance contract. So I don't know if there are further efficiencies for us to gain, but certainly in any future capital work we do, we should have an eye towards our usage costs.
It's especially true if we change the envelopes, the building construction parts.
So Dr. Rufo, I always ask the same questions, but I love the building aid. So can you, because in the past it was very low, so just for everyone, can you just explain what the big advantage for us is having our building aid go up so much?
So building aid is a form of state aid, and it is based on the amount of the project that's allowable, the allowable cost of the project, multiplied by your building aid. So the fact that our building rate went up from 24 to 40% will mean significantly more building aid than we would have gotten at that lower rate. So as I also mentioned, our building aid for this year, what's projected in the state budget is likely to go up as we are now reconciling all of the outstanding projects or projects that are in route with the state that have not yet been recorded as of this last run, which was a November, because we finished a lot. I think Carol said 12 to 15 projects that were final cost reports were filed.
Right, so now we're going to get reimbursed from the state at a bigger amount than we
Yes.
typically got in the past, which would help us with
Absolutely. It helps
our
offset, and the concept is that the building aid is aligned with your debt service, so that as your debt service comes on, your building aid comes on as an offset, as a revenue offset to the debt service expense, and that's the way it's structured to work.
My other question was, again, another one. I know in the past, too, we had our foundation aid that has been going up. And I know it's kind of, we went up last year, it went up this year. Is it going to hold at that level, or could they reduce it, or once the, because I know we're still behind, right? I think our number was like 21 million we were supposed to get, but we never got.
Yeah,
Or they said we would get, right?
Yeah, and 23-24 is to make everybody, to make us whole.
Right.
And I think the challenge or the concern is given the state's fiscal outlook, and this year all of the COVID and the federal aid that has been propping up the state as they provide essential services to New Yorkers, that federal funding is going away. So I think there is concern about how sustainable these increases that we've seen, and particularly this amount for 23-24, will be in the future.
And does that also hold true for the universal pre-K? Or is that, again, a number that they'll keep, that 1.7?
That I cannot comment on.
Okay.
When I have asked the state, because we had last year when we got the increase, we said, well, can we count on this for
Right.
years going forward?
Correct.
And they said, well, we can't tell you that. We can say that there haven't been decreases that they have seen. However, from our perspective, we haven't seen increases like this, and we've only had UPK for several years.
Right,
So.
there's our third year, right, okay.
I would just say, I'll go a little deeper on the answer. As the board knows, I began my career working on this exact topic for the legislature in Albany. When the governor releases her executive budget, they also release a fiscal plan with it that has a 5-year projection. What's interesting about this current year is, notwithstanding some of the bumpiness in the economy, the current year budget is essentially balanced, and the proposed budget was, the estimates for the proposed budget were balanced going into this budget cycle. That's unusual. Usually the state enters every budget cycle with a $3, $4, or $5 billion structural deficit that they have to close. And they're ending the current fiscal year, which expires on March 31st, with, I believe, an $8 and change billion surplus, a lot of which that surplus is going to be allocated to reserves. So it's very unusual for New York to end its year with a budget surplus. So in the short term, and the state is also seeing still record sales tax revenues. So if fiscal conditions remain unchanged, the out-year projections for out-year budget deficits are in the neighborhood of $3.5 billion. To put that in context, when I was working in the legislature and the state budget was about half the size, we were looking at $5 billion annual deficits to close. So from a sense of magnitude, these appear to me to be small, but if the economy worsens, they grow quickly. And so the real question for whether the state can sustain this will be whether we slip into a recession or not, because then the state will be forced to contend with it. Last point on state aid specifically to school districts, the full payment of foundation aid and the aid that's given to schools now was done in response to essentially to settle a lawsuit. So for the state to back away from the funding level that it's at now would mean the state would have broken the settlement conditions for that lawsuit. So I think that the state would be very reluctant
to reopen that lawsuit, having spent a lot of money to settle the lawsuit. So it may be one of the last things the state looks at as a gap closing initiative, but nothing is sacrosanct, but it does operate in the context of this lawsuit.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Dr. Rufo. Anyone else? I'm sorry, go ahead, Jack.
I just had a follow-up question to Dr. Rogers about that. The lawsuit settlement, is there a duration for which the state has to continue, or we would imagine the state would likely continue that level of state aid? Is there a period of time where that where the settlement covers, or is it solely based on we settled it, this was the level of state aid, and then going forward there are no other conditions under which they would be backing out from it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know the answer to it, but I do know the exact right person to ask. So I will find out and get back to you with an answer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rufo.
Thank you.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting on January 6, 2023 and January 9th, 2023? Shawnee, seconded by Brian. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Dr. Rufo, back to you. The Treasurer's report and appropriations, please.
Okay, the Treasurer's report, the cash on hand for the month end December 2022 was $120,933,711.58. All bank balances on the report were balanced. Bank balances for the cash accounts were reconciled to the book balances and were collateralized in accordance with the district's banking agreements and investment policy.
Thank you, Dr. Rufo. May I please have a motion to accept Dr. Rufo's Treasury report? Lisa, seconded by Lynn. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Next, we'll move to Dr. Rogers' Superintendent report, please.
Great. We have two presentations for you this evening. As I mentioned earlier, the theme for the night is technology, and we're going to have, and science. We're going to have a presentation on K-12 coding and robotics, followed by a presentation on the changing demographics of our younger student population and some state requirements that we're going to have to address. So I'll introduce our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Mr. Ray Laverso.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, Dr. Rogers, Dr. Curry, and the administration. I'm happy to kick off tonight's curriculum presentation for building algorithmic literacy. The field of computer science is rapidly growing, and there's a high demand for computer science professionals in a variety of industries. Learning computer science helps students develop problem-solving skills that can be applied to a wide range of fields, from business to healthcare. And if this was not compelling enough, you should know that much of what I just said was generated by ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a language model. It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and it's essentially an artificial intelligence application. Of course, here in Syosset, our vision predates ChatGPT. Since 2014, our district has had an ambitious vision. We wanted to give students an opportunity not only to learn how to code, but to learn algorithmic thinking as a literacy. We believe that in the future, this literacy will be on par with English and numeracy literacies. Yes, computer science is a growing field, but it's not where every student will find their passion or their purpose. We provide our students with the tools they need to build literacy in many fields, like coding, and then we support them by allowing them to go as far as their interest will take them. Syosset is pivoted towards teaching coding not in isolation, but as an algorithmic literacy to deepen learning and to align to industry standards. We've also pivoted towards creation and creativity, allowing students to extend their experience beyond kits and code blocks to developing their own programs, robots, and drones. And lastly, Syosset has pivoted to agency, not just in computer science, but in all content areas, allowing students to take the lead in their learning. Simply put, we are giving students the tools they need to define their own problems rather than having the problem define what students do. The new computer science and digital fluency standards are a great opportunity for us to take inventory of all of our progress and to look to the future. To dive deeper into these standards and how they connect to Syosset's vision and mission, I would like to introduce our K-12 coordinator for administrative and instructional technology, Ms. Christine Payne.
Thank you. Good evening. It's been 9 years already. In 2014, the district formed a technology work group with the ambitious goal of not just teaching coding, but what we would do to prepare our students for the global workplace. The work group continues to learn, explore, and pilot technology in our learning spaces. In 2016, we created a technology-wise statement to guide us. As a district, we educate to ignite curiosity. We want our students to ask why and what if, and to have the tools to succeed. We believe that problem solving is the price of admission to success in an ever-changing world. Algorithmic thinking uses problem solving to break down complex problems into smaller steps or an algorithm to find a solution. It involves analyzing data, identifying patterns, and developing a sequence of instructions to achieve a goal. It requires critical thinking, attention to detail, and a clear understanding of the problem. It involves creating models and simulations so students can visualize and test ideas. Algorithmic thinking stimulates creativity and innovation by generating fresh and inventive solutions to problems. In 2020, the computer science standards were introduced. Computational thinking, digital literacy, and cybersecurity are what we consider the power three of algorithmic thinking. Computational thinking is problem solving using computers. More and more job opportunities require competency in coding languages and digital applications. We believe in providing a wide variety of opportunities for all students to learn these skills through collaboration, competitions, and hands-on coding experiences. Every day there are more and more news reports of data breaches and cyber attacks. Cybersecurity education helps students understand the dangers and consequences of cyberbullying, identity theft, financial theft, and hacking. It empowers students with the skills and knowledge to protect themselves. From a student's first experience with Google Classroom to writing the college essay or job resume, their digital footprint will follow them. What they post, share, and search online creates a digital footprint that can have a lasting effect on their personal and professional lives. A positive digital footprint can enhance their reputation, increase opportunities, and promote good relationships. The Power 3 of algorithmic literacy supports students to problem solve, to use technology, and to take agency. Now we would like to share our earliest learners pursuing their passions through technology. It is my pleasure to introduce Kelly Fokianos, our staff developer.
Thank you, Christine. Just as with language literacy, our students begin in kindergarten constructing their algorithmic literacy. Students learn that instructions can take on forms other than words. Thank you. Kindergarten students create directional instructions to code a BBOT to travel through a grid. The target is the sight words that they are learning. Students code Ozobot robots using color to follow a maze or to simulate events such as the whirl of a tornado. Students create musical instruments using everyday materials and coding to send electrical signals to produce sound. Our elementary students are encouraged to play, to be curious, to experiment, and to work with others. From the primary grades through upper elementary, in Syosset, we foster an inclusive culture that values diverse perspectives, encourages experimentation, and collaboration. As students play and begin to deepen their knowledge of algorithmic literacy, they build relationships with their peers, both in person and online. We believe that students take agency by learning to stay safe online, by creating a good digital footprint, by respecting others, and using a safe digital space. Technology is not magic. Igniting curiosity and helping students develop problem-solving skills so they can pursue their passions is magical. And now let's take a look at how middle school students move from basic algorithmic literacy as they explore more complex tasks, test boundaries, and deepen their relationships. It is a great pleasure to welcome our Coordinator of Science and Technology, Jill Johansson.
Thank you, Kelly. Because Syosset students receive such a strong foundation in algorithmic literacy beginning in kindergarten, once they get to our middle schools, students are able to engage in online and offline tasks of significant sophistication. For example, instead of using pre-made robots to complete a task given to them, students are choosing the tasks they want to accomplish. Then they design, build, and code the robots themselves. They expand their computational boundaries by using online software to design three-dimensional objects, by writing algorithms using pseudocode, a variety of coding platforms and/or languages, and by analyzing data using multiple simulation software programs. As middle schoolers further dip their toes into what it means to have a presence online, both in school and at home, cybersecurity concepts are grappled with more intentionally, and topics include ethics and legality around student data privacy, our digital footprints, how to avoid phishing scams, and the need to protect our financial information and assets. Woven throughout all of the curricula at this level are thoughtful considerations of the social emotional skills necessary for our interactions both on and offline. Our overall goal at this level is for students to transition from learning to use technologies to using technologies to learn. To explain how the high school further develops our students' algorithmic literacy, please welcome our coordinator for mathematics and business, Dr. John Genova.
Algorithmic thinking is evident throughout the student experience at the high school. Our students use the scientific method to engage in countless cycles of ideation, exploration, and iteration. Please watch in the lower center as students create unique digital systems with custom user inputs tailored to the problem they've elected to solve. Circuitry, coding, and network design were used for students to build game controllers, create interactive maps, and other unique designs. It's this kind of thinking that forms the basis for our student work throughout the program, not merely memory of a body of facts. In 2016, Syosset High School made the bold move to blend the academically abstract with the concrete in its STEM program by developing curricula and courses that merged mathematics, technology, and computer science. Asking departments to collaborate in both planning and execution of these new courses was unprecedented. Our hypothesis was that this was the best way for students to gain experience in true cross-cutting opportunities and gain agency with tasks that would prepare them for an unimagined future. The enthusiasm our students and faculty have responded with drove early success in our System 1 course, where for 7 years, students have been developing their thinking by creating terrestrial robots that you can see in the bottom left. These robots are custom fabricated by our kids without blueprints of any kind, and need to be modified and directed by code depending on the task to be solved. So many cycles of computational thinking need to be engaged in as students design, build, test, and evaluate their own work until the task is complete. The early success of our blended robotics course was reflected in competition, enrollment growth, and energy, which drove us to wonder what we might do next. The answer was to create a drones course that enabled students to extend learning on the ground to the skies. The two rightmost images show our students constructing, coding, and testing drones to complete novel tasks. We know that our kids' computational thinking is not at its limit. With the ongoing rise of artificial intelligence, we formed an academic partnership with LIU to provide our System 2 students experience with incredibly current concepts, access to current university equipment and software, and the next level of technology. I'm super excited to report back on the future on what our students will do next. Thank you for the opportunity to share this amazing work, and I'll yield to Mr. Laversa, who will conclude our presentation.
So I've been in a rush lately, and when I asked ChatGPT to write me an ending to this presentation, it started with, in conclusion, computer science is an ever-evolving field that is playing a crucial role in shaping the future. That's what ChatGPT says. It's very obvious. ChatGPT is great at saying things that have already been said. That's its job. But it cannot help our students explore, discover, and dream. That will always be our job. I hope we've been able to demonstrate for you how we've been working to actualize our technology why statement. This is not a why statement that we're ever going to accomplish. It's a rallying call, a reminder that the future is going to be a challenge, and that every day is another precious opportunity to ignite curiosity and passion in our students. I thank you for your time and attention this evening, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Laversa. Great presentation, and the team. Anyone have any questions? No? Oh, Shorty, please.
Are we meeting the demands of the students in terms of the number, enrollment? Are we meeting the demands of the students who want to take these courses, or do they have to wait?
Dr. Park, for the most part, I would say that yes, we're staffing to need. So if students have an interest in taking a course, we do run the course, and that includes computer science classes, robotics classes, any class that would be involved with algorithmic literacy, computer science, coding.
If there are no other questions from board members, I'll just make two observations. The first is, I think that we're somewhat unique in starting our program in kindergarten, and that was framed by this idea of looking at this as a literacy, not merely a body of knowledge to acquire. And just as the literacy of reading allows someone to gain knowledge through reading, we believe that the ability to use technology in an iterative way to assign it tasks is also a skill that's going to be necessary, ever more necessary in students' lives in future. And the sooner we start them thinking about that, the more natural it will be for them. The second thing that we hope to make more natural is by starting students as early as we possibly can, we hope to expose all of our students to technology long before any gender stereotypes take root. And so that was a very intentional aspect of one of the district's work groups on gender equity in our courses to address what we saw as a gender imbalance later in middle school and high school in technology courses. So both of those things were very intentional strategies, and we have seen improvement in the gender diversity in the enrollment in the courses in the secondary schools. So we've certainly more work to be done, but it's a promising strategy. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Laversa to stay at the podium to talk about a different program, and while the next slide deck is being queued up, I'll just set the stage for this conversation as well. Certainly the board is well aware that Syosset is a diverse community and becoming more diverse every year. The state has a requirement that when you reach a certain threshold of a number of students who are English language learners and who share the same family of languages, that the district is required to at least offer what's called a transitional bilingual education program. And that is essentially an elementary school program that occurs in the home language as opposed to occurring in English. So this year, for the first time, Syosset has reached that threshold, And so because of the state regulation, we have to explore this possibility. Parents, of course, are not required to take advantage of this option. And as Mr. Laversa will point out, there are some pros and some pretty significant considerations for parents to think about. But we are required to offer it, and so we're sharing this with the board now because there are some aspects of the program we have to set in motion soon in order to be in compliance. So, Mr. Laverso.
All right, good evening again, members of the Board of Education, Dr. Rogers, Dr. Curry, and members of our administration. So tonight I'm going to provide an overview for a transitional bilingual education program that we'll be offering this fall. As Dr. Rogers has already stated, we're in a position where for the first time we have to offer this program. Our current E&L program does an excellent job of addressing the needs for all of our E&L students. However, NYSED regulations require us to present an option for a transitional bilingual education program to the community. So this presentation is going to start by reviewing the structure of what we currently do in our E&L program, and then we're going to move to introduce a transitional bilingual education program requirement. We will compare our current E&L program features with that of a transitional bilingual education program. And lastly, we will provide you with a comprehensive overview of our needs for implementing the transitional bilingual education program. We already have many English language learners in our district. Our current E&L program does an excellent job of supporting them as they progress towards proficiency in English. And before I get into the differences between what we currently do for students and a transitional bilingual education program, I'd like to provide an overview of the process we engage in to identify students who require E&L supports. Whenever a student enters our district, we provide them with a home language questionnaire, and if a family indicates that there is a language other than English spoken at home, we follow up with an interview. The interview helps us to ascertain the level of English spoken at home and whether we need to administer an English language proficiency assessment. The results of the assessment give us information pertaining to the student's English proficiency. As you can see in the sample report, there are 5 levels of proficiency, starting at beginner levels and progressing towards proficiency, entering being considered beginning, and commanding being considered proficient. The Commissioner's regulations specify minimum hours of instruction per week at each proficiency level, gradually decreasing as students become more proficient in English. These time blocks are considered units of study, and they could be standalone E&L, E&L combined in different content areas, or any combination of those two. Entering and emerging students have the same total number of hours with different types of instruction prescribed for their units of study. As students progress through transitioning and expanding, supports are slowly removed because students are gaining proficiency in English. And by the time students reach the commanding level, students are considered former English language learners, but they still must receive some combination of E&L supports for 90 minutes per week. It's important for us to note that these units of study are minimums. Our staff provides the supports that students need, which may exceed these guidelines. Our E&L program consists of 2 components, a content area component, which is pushing into classrooms, and an English language development component, which would be pulling students out of classrooms. Our goal is to help students develop their capacities in both social and academic communication. Students bring their own language of words in their home language, and our teachers provide instruction that helps students establish a connection between what they already know and their English language development. The length of time devoted to each of these blocks changes at each level and based on the specific needs of the student. Every student is different, but all students will receive some combination of these components as I showed on the previous slide. We use the MTSS block for standalone E&L instruction, which helps to develop students' social communication skills, and the content area blocks for integrated E&L instruction aimed at promoting academic language communication skills. Based on these components, we build a schedule for students that addresses their specific needs. This is an example of a schedule for a first grader at the beginning level. All of the components of E&L are scheduled into the day. Students receive standalone instruction, which includes targeted intensive language supports. There are also times during the day dedicated to integrated ENL instruction, which embeds language support in different content areas, in this case with ELA. As students become more proficient, they gradually receive less ENL instruction over time. Our current program is not only meeting the needs of students, but we're doing an excellent job. On average, it takes about 2 to 3 years for a student to reach English language proficiency. Despite our performance, we're still bound by the state education regulations. At this point, we've reached the threshold number of Mandarin-speaking students at a grade level, which is 20, requiring us to offer a transitional bilingual education program. And based on our enrollment trends, we must offer this option to students entering grades 1 and 2 this fall. As Dr. Rogers stated, ENL services are mandated by New York State. While we're required to offer this program to our community, families do have a choice. Families may choose whether they would like to participate in the transitional bilingual education program or continue with our ENL program in their home school. The focus of a transitional bilingual education program is to offer students an opportunity to receive instruction in their home language while they learn to read, speak, understand, and write in English. The ultimate goal is to help students transition to a monolingual English setting and to gain English proficiency. This is an example of what a student schedule can look like in a transitional bilingual education program. The main difference in this hypothetical example is that there are times allocated specifically for home language arts instruction. This is where students continue to develop their writing, vocabulary, and comprehension skills in their home language. The research tells us that we can leverage proficiencies in one language to facilitate the learning of a second language. Teachers do this with their early language learners in regular ENL programs as well as transitional bilingual education programs. Here I'm showing you a continuum of instruction based upon student levels. As students develop their English proficiency and show growth on the NYSESLAT assessment, they receive more English language instruction over time. The goal of a transitional bilingual education program is to transition students to instruction that is mostly in English. There's a lack of empirical research on the best way for ELs to learn content. The existing research on transitional bilingual education is mixed. Proponents suggest that this type of program helps facilitate learning English content. And the critics say that prolonged placement in a transitional bilingual education program slows down English proficiency as well as entrance into mainstream education courses. Based on our analysis of district trends and our current enrollment numbers, if all of the eligible students opted to enter the program this coming fall, we would need 3 additional teachers. This would require us to hire 3 teachers that are either grade 1 through 6 certified or birth to grade 2, and in either case, they would also need to have a bilingual education extension for Mandarin. The program also would require space, so there would be an addition of 3 classrooms that we would need. As Dr. Rogers shared at last month's meeting, Syosset is a great place for kids, and we have high enrollment in all of our elementary schools. The schools most able to accommodate the bilingual program at this point are AP Willits and Village Elementary Schools. We anticipate requiring at least 2 additional bus routes with an estimated cost of around $108,000. This amount could be higher or lower depending upon interest in the program and the final routing for the buses. Our preparation for implementing the program would need to begin this school year and continue with curriculum writing over the summer. We would also take this opportunity to retool some of our existing resources in order to meet the needs for students in the program. This would include curriculum writing and vetting curriculum materials. Based upon enrollment projections, if every student were to opt into the program that's eligible at the moment, the current estimated cost is around $413,000. This includes 3 new teachers, additional transportation, as well as curriculum materials. And curriculum materials would include textbooks, workbooks, curriculum writing. And in terms of teachers, that number could be different depending upon the level of experience of the teachers that are hired. And as I had explained on a previous slide about transportation, that number could differ depending on the number of students interested and the number of routes that we would need. There are some important next steps we need to take in our planning process. First, we need to hold information sessions with families of our Mandarin-speaking kindergarten and first grade students. The purpose of these meetings will be to inform them about this option and explain how the program will work. Once we've explained the program, our next step will be to assess their interest. Families are not required to have students participate in the program, but we're required to offer this as an option. Once we finalize our student numbers in terms of interest, we'll be able to go through a hiring process to find teachers we need to staff the additional classes. There are several concerns we have about moving forward. There are the issue of social disruption is a very important one. Students will likely need to relocate schools in order to participate in the program, and they may need to relocate again once they enter third grade. The staffing increase needed for the program will not be offset because we're going to need our E&L staff at the home school. So wherever the program ends up being housed, we will still need transitional bilingual education staff as well as our current E&L staff. And lastly, we have concerns about the minimal class size. We don't know how many students would be interested in opting into the program, and we would like to avoid a highly restrictive placement for students, which means we would not want to have a very small class size. So I want to thank you again for your time and attention this evening, and I'll happily answer any questions you may have.
So let me preface this with, last week I was at a PTA meeting at Robbins Lane, and the E&L department presented, and I took in a lot of information I did not know. I was very impressed. I can imagine all of our schools are putting in the time and effort and the resources for the current program. So I guess my question comes down to the option that these parents will have. And I wonder, you raise concerns that the two that jump out at me is the social disruption and the busing. And I wonder if we need to make very clear to the families that may not be English speaking at all what this option is and how great the current program is. And obviously we can't nudge people, but we can absolutely give them the facts and let them make the decision based on those facts. So that's the first thing that jumped out at me. And then the second thing that jumps out at me was the last thing you said, Mr. Laverso, about this minimum. If 4 people district-wide decide to do this, are we forced to do it under the new regulations, or can we make the decision that that program may be less beneficial to those 4 students and then scrap it?
So I'll field that question. Mr. Laverso has been on the phone with folks from the State Education Department asking that latter question directly. And there is no hard and fast rule. So what we've been doing is reaching into the rules around special education. And in special education, only the most severely disabled students would be put in a class of fewer than 8 students because the thought there is that being in a class with 5 or 4 students is not really a class anymore. You just don't have all that many peers to make friends with, and it becomes a very restrictive placement. So we're looking at those special education social constructs as a thought process for how we would think about what is such a restrictive environment that it does a disservice. But unfortunately, it would be easier if the state gave us some guidelines, but I think we're going to have to work through that.
So one of my questions was what Brian was saying, is that if we fall below that 20 threshold, if it could bump us out of being required to do it, because if enough kids opt out, then we don't have 20 kids who are going to be in the class. So that was one of my questions. And since it's required by the state, is there any shot there's funding from the state that will offset our costs?
To your first point, even if students do not opt into the program, they still have to be counted towards the number that we would require, that we need to have. That 20, they would still be counted towards that 20. In subsequent years, if there were 15 or less students in a grade band, then we would not be obliged to offer the program. So 15 is the threshold in following years. So if, for example, first and second grade enrollment trends dipped below 15, we would no longer need to offer the program. That is opposite of the trends we've been observing for the past 4 years, but I'm just giving you some, perspective there. In terms of funding, there are always grants. Most of those grants are not grants that we would qualify for, but for the most part, it is not. It's not like universal pre-K where there's funding associated with it. It is something that we're required to do, and the state gives us some flexibility in how we decide to do it, but ultimately they do not provide additional funding.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. I do have several questions. Question number one is that can the student opt out at any time once in the program? And the second question is that since we are holding an info session for families, and then a lot of these families, as Mandarin as their home language, are we going to have translators and all the flyers going out? I do think that it's very important that it's being translated into that language, especially having a translator, a proficient, someone's proficient in the language to be on site to answer questions or to do any translation necessary. And the third question is that obviously this is new for the SIASC learning community. I'm not sure if other districts on Long Island has that transitional or even immersion bilingual programs. Have we looked at other data or get other data even from New York City Board of Education to see how we can support these kids, or to see how the results will be after 2 years going back to the mainstream classes? I do think that it is very important because elementary school is the time that they develop their social skills, and then missing that 2 years with the regular classes in their own school, it's very critical. 2 years is a very long time. As we see in the COVID years, the lack of social interactions with students, and it's creating a lot of mental issues after that. And we're hoping to help students with this program, but we don't want to create more problems after. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. I'll try to take them in order. I think your first question was about opting out. A student or a family could opt out at any point. So if they decided to opt in and October 15th came and they decided they no longer wanted to be in the program, they would be able to opt out. I think your second question was related to translation services. We will utilize all of our translation services for the information sessions. We're already working on drafting messages to families, and those will be translated as well. And we plan to do sessions during the school day at different times, as well as evening sessions between now and the beginning of March. And then your last question about resources and other programs. On Long Island, there are some bilingual, there are some immersion programs. I visited one. It was for Spanish. It's a little bit different. Spanish and English are a little bit more comparable in terms of their alphabet, so it would be considered a Category 1 and a Category 2 language, whereas for Mandarin, the spread is a little bit more significant. It's a Category 1 versus a Category 4 difference, because the alphabet and the characters are much different. While my visit to the Spanish immersion program was wonderful and I learned a lot, it's not something comparable to what we need to be doing. New York City does have resources. There are bilingual education resource networks. We call them BURNs. I've been in contact with the Long Island BURN and the Albany BURN, as well as the New York City BURN, and they have definitely given me recommendations for curriculum materials that we'll be vetting and utilizing as we move forward with curriculum writing. One thing to note about the home language arts instruction, just like with ELA, where we have textbooks and reading materials, we would need the same thing in Mandarin for students to accommodate them in first and second grade. So that's an important piece of this, and I've already been in contact with someone from NYU and their bilingual center.
Thank you. Other than that it is required by the New York State, do you see any benefits of the traditional bilingual program versus what we have now? First question. And second is, why is it limited to just first and second when you're counting the families? And if we have more than 20 families in third grade, fourth grade in the future that's moving in, let's say, will that increase to third and fourth graders as well?
So in terms of benefits for the program, it's a program that I know we would be able to do, and I know we would be able to do it well. If families were interested in it, I don't think that it would be detrimental in terms of their language development. We do have the social disruption issue is an important one, and I don't want to ignore that. But in terms of learning language, I'm confident that with our staff and hiring new staff, we'd be able to do a very good job in making sure that students gain language proficiency, whether they remain in our E&L program or if they go into our TBE program. And your other question was relating, I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Why is it limited to just first and second graders?
Well, so our enrollment numbers over the past, we looked at the trends over the past few years, and the average in first and second grade has been over 20. So if that number were to go over 20 in third, fourth, and fifth grade, we would be obligated to offer the program there as well. However, and this goes back to what I was saying about the effectiveness of our current E&L program, we do notice that students tend to come in and they get E&L services, and by third and fourth grade, they've reached proficiency, and we don't see as many. And this is not just unique to Mandarin, it's across all languages. So that's a testament to the effectiveness of the current program we have.
And that is for the children who come to the district from kindergarten?
Correct.
Or first grade?
Yes.
As to start. Okay. But if someone moves in third grade or fourth grade, and that number increases, then we need to implement those.
Yes, and it's also, they give us some flexibility in calculating it in terms of, so if we had 21 year, we don't necessarily need to offer it the next year. What you look for is an average over 3 years.
Okay. And also, one more question. The finances that you have calculated included only the staff and busing, I believe. Do we have plan to include social workers or psychologists who will have to help those children go back to their home school, basically moving again within the district?
The current plan would be to utilize the staff that we already have in place at each school, whether it's the home school or the school that's housing the program. But additional tutors and social workers are something that we can also look at.
Hi, thank you very much. You said that they can opt out at any time. I just wanted to check if they could opt in any time also. If they initially choose not to be in the program, is it something they can go into later? My other part of my question is, are there other districts in the same situation as us, and is there a way to partner with them so that maybe it's not 4 students in a class or it's more students in a class and we can share costs and things like that?
The answer to the first question is that they would. I do believe they would be able to opt in if they wanted to. I think the more likely scenario would be opting out, but I could see a scenario where they'd want to go into the program. There are schools that have transitional bilingual education programs. Many schools, as soon as they hit 20, that's their first approach. They do a transitional bilingual education program. In terms of partnering up with them, I don't want to say for sure that that's not something possible, but I don't know of any programs on the island that do partner with one another. I could double check on that.
Mr. Laverso, just a thought or a question for you. The children that would be entering this program in grades 1 and 2, their schedules look very similar to the regular schedules of the other grades in the building. So would these children be in their own PE classes, music classes, art classes by themselves, or would they ever have a chance? I know sometimes grades intermingle in some of the special classes. Would they have a chance to intermingle with the other grades, the other first or second grades in the building? And if that's the case, since their lunch is the same time, would it be possible for these parents to opt into allowing their child to continue at that elementary school, since maybe they make friends in the special classes or at lunch or recess?
Well, with our current, if we have a first grader that comes in right now with our current ENL program, one thing that we noticed, and this is something that I had been talking to the principals about, our current social work staff definitely works with students to make sure that they're playing with students at lunchtime. There's a lot of visual aids at the elementary level that definitely facilitate that. And for the most part, you know, kindergarten and first graders, within a few days, they are playing during recess and in PE. But in terms of just giving students the option to go into specials in a transitional bilingual program, the specials they would be traveling with one another in that program. It's a very similar schedule with the exception of the home language arts instruction. But they would also have, they would still have opportunities at recess to definitely socialize. And part of the program would be to develop the social piece of the language development. It's not just the academic piece, it's also the social piece. I don't know if I answered every part of your question.
Almost. Thank you. The last part of it is, if they do, they transition well in the first and second grade, would it be possible to allow those children, since maybe they make friends and recess and whatnot, to actually opt to stay at that elementary school?
From an educational standpoint, it would certainly be my preference to give families and students that option. However, as you know, we've seen in our enrollment trends in last month's presentation, that's not something that's always predictable. So it's not something that we can guarantee, but it would, all things being equal, we would certainly want to do that to the extent possible.
So I'll just make some summative comments. Obviously, we put a lot of energy into trying to think through this, and notwithstanding all the effort we've put into it, there will still be some open questions. The question about what to do when these kids exit out of the program, that may be exiting out because they've reached third grade, or it may be exiting out because they've reached the commanding level in their English language proficiency. And I think we all recognize and worry about the social disruption of taking kids away from their peers in the neighborhood and busing them across town to another place so that they can have a specialized form of instruction, and then how long that lasts and how you integrate into or reintegrate into a home community. I think the other challenge for us is looking at this. There are several chicken and egg problems with this program. Mr. Laverso promises that we'll do it well, and I have no doubt that we will do our best. But in a program like this in particular, the staff is essential to success. So I'm often asked, about this school district or that school district, and the strength of the school district. And if you're an elementary student, a parent of an elementary student, I say, do you like your child's teacher? Because that's the person they're spending so much time with. And I think that's exactly the case here. We need to hire well for this program to be a success. And we're not just looking for an excellent elementary teacher, we're looking for an excellent elementary teacher with a very specific skill set. And so I think even before we know whether there's going to be interest in that program, I think we need to be out in the hiring season as early as possible so that the hiring pool has not experienced any hiring pressure when we enter that pool. So I think we need to be aggressive about looking to hire, even though I can't guarantee that there will be a body of students that are interested in taking this class. So we're thinking about trying to calibrate how many staff we hire, how quickly in the pool, but I do think that that's a significant consideration. And having spoken to colleagues who have immersion programs, bilingual programs, they will often comment that the challenge is in finding great staff because it, by its very nature, it narrows the pool from which you can choose. So the second thing that is kind of a chicken and egg problem is the curriculum writing that has to be done. We will need to onboard Mandarin-speaking instructional staff in order to do the curriculum writing project. As smart as Mr. Loverso is, I don't think he's up for the task. So we need someone who's Mandarin speaking to be able to do that. And this is going to be more than a summer curriculum writing project because you're talking about lifting an entire grade level worth of curriculum in a new language. So I think we're going to have to onboard that person in the current school year and get them started in the short term on trying to take Syosset's program and lift it into Mandarin so that the students in the new TBE program are having the same excellent Syosset experience, not just sort of a homogenized off-the-shelf Mandarin program. And I think that's going to be difficult. And then lastly, just thinking through the logistics of the busing. And while on the one hand, we want to minimize the number of buses that we hire, we also don't want to maximize time spent on a bus for very young elementary students, first, second graders. No one wants to see them on a bus for long periods of time because the bus has to sweep through half of Syosset before it goes off to the school where the program is going to be located. So part of the reason for wanting to have this conversation with you in February is because I think we need to start our search for candidates sooner rather than later, so we can hire sooner rather than later, so we can curriculum write and involve those staff members in the very conversations that you're talking about with parents to describe the program and to meet the people who might possibly be teaching in the program. So unfortunately, and notwithstanding some of the budget pressures that we're experiencing, I think it's incumbent upon us to get started now for all the reasons that I stated.
So let's say we got very lucky, we got 3 wonderful teachers that we wanted, and they hired right away and started working on curriculum writing. And when the time came, not enough people were signed up. What happens to these teachers?
Well, I've been thinking through that scenario as well. And I think there's the typical HR answer, the by-the-book HR answer, and then what I think would probably happen in the real world. School districts excess based on seniority, so the least senior person is accessed when there isn't a need. So one of these people, shortly after being hired, would be accessed. But that's certainly unkind to someone. So I think what we would try to do is identify classroom teacher retirements at the elementary level, and if the people that we hired were not needed for the transitional bilingual education program, they still have the regular elementary certification. It would be a conversation with them about, we had intended to have you teach this kind of program, but it turns out that the vacancy that we have is in a regular general education classroom, and if they're still interested in that opportunity, then we would move them into that role instead. And it is not uncommon for us to have 3, 4, or 5 elementary retirements in a year. So in the back of my mind, what I'm thinking is that would be our shock absorber in case we hired these people, but the program didn't run.
Very quick question. Are you observing any trends for any other language groups down the line that are approaching the threshold or possibly will? We're nowhere near that.
Mr. Laverso is a little closer to that. I've been watching the overall population of a couple of hundred kids, but not any one language group.
I'd have to double check, but I believe Korean is a close second, but it's not near 20.
Does it make sense to proactively look for people who would be able to fit both needs, so they could be the regular elementary school teacher and they would be able to have the specialization in whatever languages we feel we're close on, just so because it seems harder to find the specific language that we need than it does to find a great elementary school teacher, because it's such a specific skill set. So would it make sense to maybe proactively try to hire people who possess whatever skill set we think they need, so we kind of have them in the wings waiting, that we can pull them out and then we can just replace a regular elementary school teacher, which is less complicated to find?
I think an example, the last time we hired for an elementary school teacher, I believe we had 1,200 applications for the position. So the pool is very broad, but within that pool, I think there were about half a dozen people that had other language skills out of a 1,200 person pool. So I think your idea of being on the lookout for acquiring language skills is a good one, and certainly one that we look for. And you know, in this particular case, they have to have the regular elementary certification. We're just looking for the bilingual extension in Mandarin. And we can certainly look for bilingual extensions in other languages. And a thing that a lot of school districts do, and we as well, is look for secondary and tertiary certifications, because they make people easier to assign to different jobs. So often we look for a special ed certification or a regular ENL certification, and an elementary teacher that has multiple certifications just ends up checking multiple boxes for us. So that's a good strategy, and whenever we find someone with a second language skill, they get a second look from us every time.
Okay, I have a quick question too. When do you anticipate that we would kind of have the pool of people who are going to opt in?
I would hope to have a decent idea of how many people would want to opt in somewhere in March.
Okay, anyone else? Thank you so much, Ms. Laverso.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Michelle Yen, spokesperson for the Citizens Advisory Committee for Finance, will report on the last meeting. Michelle?
Good evening. I'm sorry, my eyes are a little blurry, so I'm going to try to get through this. Our last meeting was January 23rd. We had a number of new members who joined the committee. We made introductions and got started with the meeting. The administration explained to the committee that because the district is considered affluent, it does not qualify for a number of those grants that might be out there, which are based on financial need. And we did discuss that we did have a grant writer, and the cost of which the district had hired the grant writer had been a break-even situation. So we did try that. Alternative sources of revenue that were discussed with the administration and with the district's attorney, Marianne Sadowski from Ingram & Smith. She spoke to the committee regarding the limits that are placed on the district by law. So the district cannot do fundraising. The solicitation for donations would have to come from a separate foundation if that was going to be done. We discussed naming rights, which is not allowed by state education law. So you can have a nominal acknowledgement, like buy a brick, that's allowed, but we cannot go and have a billboard saying eat at Joe's or Jersey Mike's, whatever else you want to say. Rental of property that's not currently in use for operations can be done at fair market value. We already have district policies that cover a various number of revenue sources, so we can look into the more policies that we have right now. And we did have some ideas that might pass the state requirements, but if those do are good for the state, we have to consider local laws, which could be zoning, and that could limit us there. Then we had the district considering using two cooperative investment organizations that have a potential for alternative depositories for investments of our district funds. Our attorneys had been reviewing those agreements for both firms, and there were representatives who came and made presentations. One of them was in person, and the other was virtual. We had one from New York Cooperative Liquid Securities Systems, which is called New York Class, and the other one was New York Liquid Asset Fund, NYLAF, and that was the virtual one. The committee asked both of those firms about their rates, their fees, the details of their services, and the support functions that they provide to us. The service related to arbitrage calculations, which is something the district might have to be looking into, way that the rates are going, is that the district's earning rates, if they're exceeding the borrowing rates, we discussed that portion and possibility, and both of them did have some services related to that. Guidance is available from the Office of the State Controller to assist the committee members to understand what investing and protecting public funds is about, and about using fund reserves, which we normally talk about in our budget meetings. And then the administration is going to summarize all the points that came about from these proposals and give it back to us for an evaluation. And our next committee meeting will be tomorrow night at Southwoods, right here. Okay?
Thank you, Michelle. My eyes are blurry too, so don't feel bad. Do you have any questions, Chuck? Does anybody? Brian? Okay, go ahead.
Less a question than a statement. So I've been a member of that committee for 5 or 6 years. I can't remember. Before that was the best committee meeting I think that we've ever had. So kudos to Dr. Rufo, to you, to everyone who was in attendance. It was we don't often get such a high level of direct participation from community members with expertise. That opportunity through that committee structure is unique so far in the district. And what we saw, I think, in terms of the level of participation and knowledge and willingness for folks to donate their time and expertise to the district was phenomenal. And opportunities like that, I feel like, number one, sort of have a value that the more direct participation that the board gets, the more knowledge we're going to end up with from a lot of diverse sources. We're going to end up making better decisions. So that opportunity is tremendous, I think, for us in terms of our own education. Number two, the other thing that I think was critical and is really interesting to see is several board members attended that meeting. And one of the nice things about having board members attend committee meetings is that we can brief each other afterwards. So Michelle does a tremendous job with the minutes, so thank you. And you had to stay late to do it, especially tonight. One of the things that we may be able to do going forward is board members, a few of them who may decide to attend that committee, can brief the others in public. That's one of the benefits of committee work, is that we can divide and conquer. We can keep everyone up to date instead of having Michelle stay late, and we can brief each other in reasonably good detail. That's something that I think we should consider going forward, especially given the value that a committee like this and other committees might have for dividing the work among the board.
I'm going to nominate Mr. Ostrick to be the one to report back to us after these meetings, but I think he's right in a lot of ways, because Michelle, you do a wonderful job, but I think if we're going to work in committee and there's going to be multiple board members that are not in attendance, I think it's up to us from our perspective as board members to update the rest of you on what happens at these meetings.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Michelle. See you tomorrow night. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so we're going to move to Board of Education update. It has been a very difficult few weeks for the Daggett family. It is unimaginable the pain that they have endured. The Board of Education, the school district, the Syosset community are all very sorry for your loss, and we grieve with you. We are all heartbroken. We are all parents. We love our children, and we love the students as they are our own children. This was very difficult for us to deal with. Ben was a beautiful young man, shining star with a magnetic personality, so much potential. Everybody he met instantly loved him, and he made a lasting impression at the high school in such a short period of time. We are all heartbroken. Our learning community has come together to support Ben and his family. They rallied in so many ways. They went to the hospital. They set up a makeshift memorial. They posted beautiful pictures and stories about Ben online. All expressions of love, caring, and compassion. I want to thank all our students, our teachers, our staff, our guidance counselors, our mental health professionals for all their support. This is our worst nightmare. We have an excellent mental health professional staff to speak to, and when you're ready, if you need to speak to someone, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next month, we are here for you. We are here for the Daggett family. We will never forget Ben, his siblings, or his parents, and he will live in our hearts forever. Thank you. I wanted to give an update, too, on some of the boards, going-ons, I guess. Some of us attended the Nassau-Suffolk School Board Association along with the Nassau and Suffolk Superintendents Association Conference on the status of the New York State economy, featured by the New York State Controller Thomas DiNapoli. He gave a general positive overview of the effects, of the state economy on our schools. Budget currently, Dr. Rogers had spoke about a couple of them previously. However, the next few years would be challenging because of the unknowns, and the districts will continue to cautiously spend money. Next order was that we were very fortunate to be able to go on a tour of the new facilities at the Hicksville High School. We were invited by the superintendent and the president of the board. They're very gracious to have us there. They did an excellent job. They even gave us a pamphlet summarizing the work that they had done on the auditorium, on the aquatic center. Touring this facility for us was very useful since we had a lot of questions, and to be able to see dreams come to fruition, would help us in our future endeavors. We also toured the cafeteria, which they did new, and again, it was nice to see what things could look like, and it would help us plan. Second thing was that the board came back and we actually did our first workshop. We broke up into small groups. We discussed items. We had interactions between the various board members on various topics back and forth. We will summarize all of the ideas that were brought forward. Thank you, Dr. Curry, for facilitating everything. We had some feedback from some of our community members about not streaming. This was because, in this particular case, since it was the first time and we were working in small groups, we did not feel at this time that it lended itself well to live streaming. But we took note of your comments and we welcome them. And we appreciate your feedback as always.
Last but not least, the board, on February 1st, we celebrated World Read Aloud Day. It's a day that's dedicated not just to reading, but to the art and practice of reading aloud, which is so important, especially something that's fostered in very young years in an elementary school. We were invited to read aloud at Village Elementary School. We just wanted to say that we're honored to be viewed as role models for our young readers in the district, and we always enjoy the opportunity to be invited into the schools and into the classrooms. I had an adorable first grade class. I enjoyed reading to them very much, and I think it's nice for them also to see other adults in the district and learn about, who other people are, just opposed to their, elementary teacher that they're with all day. So it was a great experience, and we're happy to be part of World Read Aloud Day. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anybody want to add anything? Brian?
I think it's wonderful that we're invited into the schools and that we get a chance to read, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing that. I just, maybe this is coming out of left field, Dr. Rogers, but it reminds me of a lot of the comments I've got since I've been on the board about parents' access to the schools and to the classrooms. And, I know, obviously there was the pandemic, and then we moved to get back to the pre-pandemic level. And you don't have to answer me right now, but I'm wondering, do you feel that we're at that point when it comes to parent involvement, especially in the elementary schools? Parents that aren't on the school board. And I just wanted to know if you thought we were close, still working on it, or there.
My impression is that we are where we left off prior to the pandemic, and I know that I saw a lot of invitations go out from elementary schools for the curriculum celebrations that are part of the elementary curriculum when they finish certain units. The nice thing about the way that's structured is that it's not all at once, and so it's a much more manageable group. I know I've attended a number of different events, from Halloween parades to multicultural events to tiny house exhibitions at Berry Hill, and the gyms and fields and cafeterias have been just full of parents in the building. So I feel as though there's been a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm and frankly a lot of appreciation for what we got back after having lost it for a couple of years. So I think all of our principals have been working hard to find those opportunities to reintegrate our educational community. And to Ms. Chang's point from earlier, the social impact of the pandemic is going to take some time to undo. In some ways, I think that the social impact is going to be harder to address than the academic loss that some may have experienced. So that's work that's going to continue, but I do feel like there has been a very intentional effort on our part to create wonderful opportunities for parents to be part of the learning community.
One other question, and thank you, Dr. Rogers. I put you on the spot on that one. We approved 2 minutes today, right? We approved January 6th and the 9th. Are we going to, when we distribute the write-up, because obviously it was decided not to record the goals meeting, will we do it as minutes that we approve at a future meeting, or will this just be sort of a summary of what we did?
So I don't think that there were actual minutes taken where someone recorded verbatim the words that were spoken by everyone. But as you know, you wrote a lot of things on Post-it notes. We did organize and take notes on that. And then the cabinet, as a cabinet exercise, debriefed the meeting and tried to distill the conversation of the board into themes. And we're working through processing that now, and I hope to make that summary available to the board, so you'll have access to that. And it's our attempt to synthesize multiple conversations into more cogent themes that the board would then react to. So this is our processing of all that language to try and get to, as you know, some pretty pithy, cogent goal statements that will drive some of the work that we're doing around facilities, obviously, as we've talked about quite a bit, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I hope to have that for you soon, actually.
Just to follow up, I mean, I know you would give that to me. I was wondering, will that be made available to the public? Will it be minutes that we make available to the public that we approve once we've had a chance to look at it?
I don't know that I could characterize them as minutes, but our intention has always been to make them public.
Yeah. So I actually think that not recording this was a big miss by us, and the fact that we've had as many people come out to talk about these two particular topics as we've had in the last 2 years, and the level of interest in the community about these two particular topics, I feel like was a real missed opportunity for us. And I wasn't quite sure if I heard that we decided to or not to live stream and record the next working group meeting that we're going to have. I know that we decided to accept feedback, but I'm not sure that I heard what the next step about that potential feedback might be.
Right, so at this point, Jack, we haven't made a decision. We've just gotten the feedback and we're taking it into consideration.
Great, so let's have a discussion about whether or not we as a board think it's a good idea to potentially live stream and record that meeting. I've already made my point clear. I think we should absolutely be doing that.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I think maybe the way to do this is maybe we don't have a goals meeting planned right now. So why don't we make sure before we have that meeting, we're streaming every other meeting. So right before we have our next goal meeting, let's have a discussion item and have this discussion.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Okay. There is no legislative items. Next item is audience to the public. The Asset Board of Education and Administration welcomes your attendance at the Board of Education meeting. Audience to the public affords residents of the districts the opportunity to address the Board of Education. Residents must enter their full name and address into the register located at the microphone before they speak. Each resident will have 4 minutes to address the Board of Education. The board will not permit polling, of the individual board members by the speakers. After every resident wishing to speak has had the opportunity to do so, the Board of Education and/or the administration will do their best to provide responses to the residents' questions or comments. After every resident has had a chance to speak, the chair may recognize residents who wish to address the Board of Education a second time after their initial 4-minute turn. No speaker is permitted to address issues concerning any individual student or staff member. All in attendance at the Board of Education public meeting must conduct themselves in a respectful manner. Does anybody want to come up for audience to the public? Yes, please.
Should I sign this thing first? My name's Kenneth Malloy Jr., and I live on 27 Renee Road. What I want to talk about, I read the minutes from the January 29th meeting, and I didn't really want to let, knowing what I know about indigenous people and my interaction with them, I didn't want to let that some people's words stand. I've been in the district 35 years. My son and daughters went here. They were on opposite ends of the academic spectrum, but they were wonderfully treated at the school, and I thank the board and everybody who is associated with this. I went to Syracuse University, played lacrosse with 4 indigenous Onondagas, and one of them actually is the Tadahaho of the Iroquois Nation, right now the chief of the entire Iroquois Nation, which is Senecas, Onondagas, Mohawks, a few other, Oneidas, Cayugas, Tuscaroras. Anyway, I asked his cousin, who I played with, Ron Hill, about what he felt about the name Braves. He said he had absolutely no problem with that. Okay, that's the micro of the people I've known. The macro is, I understand this, the State Board of Education is trying to withhold funds from anybody who won't change some of these things, okay? But what I read about is that the Seneca tribe, the tribal council from the Senecas, was who they referenced and asked about what would be offensive, okay? So there was a little bit of, with all the school boards, they didn't really understand like what was expected. So the Canandaigua School Board, who happens to have the same name as Syosset, the Braves, okay, brought in the tribal council from the Senecas, who were the ones who advised the New York State, and they were asked, and they asked them, what do we do with our name, the Braves? They said, we have no problem with the name Braves. Now, I understand that there's the names here, okay, and there's these images and caricatures over here, okay? But in the last meeting, people were conflating the two, okay? They're not the same thing. So some of these people who spoke, probably their only interaction with indigenous people, you know, what do they do? Buy tax-free cigarettes out in the Hamptons? I don't know. But what I'm saying is that really consider, okay, that you really don't want to change the name Braves, because what we want to change is the caricatures, the images, and everything that the profiles of indigenous people. But as far as the Braves go, okay, I could tell you that the Seneca Tribal Council, the people I know, the indigenous people on the Onondagas, including the Tatahaho, the chief, I could tell you that it's not offensive to them. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much for coming up. Anyone else? Okay. This will close audience to the public.
Thank you for your comments. At the last meeting, I made the point that the state has put together an advisory panel, and my understanding is that that advisory panel is a sub-panel of a Native American advisory panel that is supposed to advise the Ed Department on a whole number of items, of which the mascot is one. So I'm waiting for some information from the state as to whether that panel has met, and if so, if they've offered any conclusions. You know, as soon as I'm given that information, I'll share it with the board.
Just so you know, some of these issues are in flux, and you use the term Native American, okay? There's indigenous people out there who don't want to be referenced to some Italian explorer who discovered Rio de Janeiro, just so you know.
Okay, so that brings us to unfinished business. The Board of Education has unfinished business from the last meeting. We had discussed the use of Native American team name and mascot. Does anybody have any comments? Yeah, no,
I think it's prudent to wait for the results of the advisory panel, like Dr. Rogers just said. That's my opinion.
Anyone else? When is the advisory panel?
I was told that the umbrella group was supposed to have a meeting 2 weeks ago, and they were supposed to set up a subcommittee from that group. And I'm keeping in touch with someone from my state association who's watching this issue for us, and that subcommittee has not met.
Okay. I'm assuming that we had this on here as unfinished business because we wanted to vote on this. I'm proposing that we vote on it in the March meeting. We've had now 2 months.
that we've had this up for discussion. It's not something we really have a choice over. It's mandatory. My other thoughts on it are that I would like to involve the current seniors in the new name selection. So if we continue to wait, then those students are not going to have the option to weigh in. I don't know how anybody else feels, but I would like to propose that we vote on it in our March meeting. Does anybody have an issue with that?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Before I could answer that one. Dr. Rogers, do you have a vision of what that committee, when the time comes, provided we have the decision of the subcommittee from the state, what our committee, if you call it committee, where the entire community will have a chance at the table, so to speak. Perhaps if we are, again, I don't know when this decision is going to come, so it's hard to plan really, but maybe we should, you could suggest the format for that committee and also the timetable for roundtables, if you will, similar to what was really effective, in my opinion, is were the community meetings over phase 1, phase 2, if you recall, a few years back. I personally would love to see that level of participation, not a 10 to 12 people committee on something like this. Just my suggestion. So perhaps we could start, brainstorming that prior to our vote.
So I think, should the board take the decision that we would need to have a new mascot and team name, then we can certainly do a lot of public engagement, and my presumption would be that we would do a lot of public engagement. I think that engagement would probably take several forms. The last time Syosset looked at changing its mascot, there was a smaller committee that was tasked with the role of narrowing down ideas to a handful of ideas that would take some broader consideration. So I think we'll end up getting a lot of ideas when we have write-in candidates for elections. Sometimes the write-in candidates are names of cartoon characters, et cetera, and I worry that if we have a very open-ended kind of a process, we'll need to thin out some things that would be inappropriate for several reasons. And I think that a group that's tasked with thinning out things that would not work for a school district, for, let's say, but then narrowing it down to half a dozen likely candidates and then taking feedback from the public on that, engaging with students. I think the students would have a lot of thoughts on how they'd want to be represented. Certainly we'd want to make a vehicle for alumni to share their thoughts on the subject available to the school district as well. Assuming that many alumni are far-flung, that's probably going to be an electronic tool of some kind. But I would see the most important first step being gather a lot of ideas, maybe 100 ideas, try to narrow the 100 ideas down to half a dozen really viable options, and then take a lot of feedback on those half dozen really viable options, and then narrow it down to, let's say, cut that number in half, and then have some sort of a process by which students express their feelings on it. And again, I'd want to be guided by the board on, how much involvement you would want to have in that process as well, but you'd certainly want to take some feedback from the students. My understanding was 20 years ago, when the district last looked at changing the mascot, the vote was held among the students, and they chose from among a series of options, and ultimately that was what moved forward. And then a contest was held among the students to draw some imagery around the winning character, and that contest was again judged by fellow students. So that was the process 20 years ago. I've seen similar things take place in other school districts that have changed their mascots over the course of the last 10 years or so. And basically there has to be a wide end of the funnel to collect lots of ideas. There has to be a place where you thin it out, and you have to have some sort of way of getting a representative feel of where the community's interests lie, and then ultimately the board has to make a decision.
This conversation month after month continues to confuse me. Dr. Rogers, the advisory panel, what are they going to be telling us? I'll leave it at like that broad of a question. I apologize.
So when we talked about this at the last meeting, I speculated that the advisory panel is going to review names that I'm struggling for the precise right word. Examples of names that in one context might be considered offensive, but in another context might not. So, for example, I'm thinking of the NFL football team, the Raiders. The Raiders are, I guess, pirates wearing helmets, but they would not be seen as offensive to Native Americans or indigenous people. But there are a number of school districts whose Raider name derives from the idea that Native Americans were raiding early settlements and therefore were in conflict with white settlers. So that Raider name in one context might have no history associated with it, and the Raider name in another context might have indigenous history associated with it. And my understanding was that the role of this committee was going to be to try and parse some of these more challenging names and give guidance to the State Education Department. The State Education Department is, of course, the entity that has the authority to compel us. And based on that advice that they were given, I assumed that we would get even more refined guidance from the department as to what would or would not pass muster.
So it's possible that there are school districts in New York right now that may not know for sure if their name is going to be captured by this new regulation. I mean, I think we spoke about it and you seemed comfortable that Braves was going to be captured, but you make it sound like they're going to go through the 70 odd names that are, I guess, arguably offensive, and they're going to give guidance on which of those names are indeed offensive and are not offensive, and then let these districts know then?
Yeah, I think that what the department would say right now, and they have had some, there's an advisory council of school superintendents that meets with the department and rotates every year, and this topic has come up, and the department's orientation to this is to be more aggressive in their interpretation rather than less aggressive. By aggressive, I mean to try and distance school districts from any mascots that have any Native American history associated with them whatsoever. So if our mascot clearly has that history associated with it because of the imagery and that has been used in conjunction with it. So there's no question where ours derives from. So from the department's perspective, I think that they would say that this is a very clear case if we were to ask, say, the deputy commissioner who wrote the memorandum. But the department has indicated that they've set up this body to review. So do I think there are school districts in the state that are wondering whether some of the changes they have made either to the imagery that they use or I want to be careful not to call out a specific school district, but that have taken a name and removed, let's say, a word that might be interpreted to be pejorative from the name but kept part of the name. would removing the pejorative word, even though the history of the name clearly derives from indigenous people, would that not pass muster? So, and I'm apologizing for being intentionally vague about what I'm doing, but I don't feel like I want to judge my colleagues or other school districts by using anyone as an example, but I can certainly think of quite a few school districts that have names that in one context might not necessarily be perceived as reflective of Native American history, and in other contexts would absolutely be seen that way. So in the end, the question will be how the department gives us additional guidance. But again, if you ask my own opinion is that I don't think that the staff at the department would regard our nickname as being in question. They would see its derivation as being dispositive.
So we know it's happening. I think we've known that since November. So when are we voting? And what are we doing to make the change in the 2-year period we're given, right? That's really what we need to talk about. And I don't remember who asked, maybe it was Anna. You're going to come back to us with what you think is a best way to elicit feedback, I guess, from the community, from students, from staff. And is that something we're going to do next month? Is that something you'll be ready to report? Because it seems like we should have all of our ducks in a row by the end of June, because that is our deadline. I mean, whether we vote now or we vote in June, I don't see a difference, but I do see that we should get started for the reasons Mr. Rotolo said. We want to engage our current seniors. So we should be able to get started on the process. Anyway, it's late, so I don't want to keep having this conversation month after month.
Lynn.
Sorry, in addition to process, can we look at the pricing? Can we start to look at pricing on changing everything, where it needs to be done?
We have done some preliminary looks at that, Mr. Stuber and the athletic department and Dr. Rufo. The biggest cost item will be the end zone for the turf field. It will probably cost about $70,000 to replace the Braves in the one end zone, and I'm assuming that we would either put the new mascot or the word Syosset there. There are some scoreboards that have Braves or Brave imagery on it. My understanding is they're relatively inexpensive to fix because they just have a magnetic piece of metal that would go over the existing scoreboard with whatever the new branding is. So think in the neighborhood of hundreds of dollars as opposed to thousands of dollars. The athletics department over the course of the last several years has been turning over uniforms and moving towards we call it the varsity S. So we wouldn't have a sudden uniform cost that would be associated with it. There are some aspects of the hardscaping here. There's a monument in front of the high school that was a gift to the class of, I think, 2008 that has a Native American bust on it, and there would be a demolition cost associated with removing that class gift. But I think the biggest cost item by far would be the turf field renovation.
Is it possible, I hate to demolish a class gift, is it possible to look at a way to sorry, that was bad timing. Is it possible to look at a way to fix the statue as opposed to demolishing it so it makes it appropriate for the new regulations, but it doesn't destroy their gift?
Yeah, demolish was an unfortunate term, so yeah, I think what we would look at doing is seeing if there was something that we could do with the sign. Obviously, 99% of the sign would not offend the state education department, so it may be possible to put a plaque over the bust that is there or some other way of using that gift without having to remove it altogether. I'm just pointing out that it exists.
Right, okay. No, that would be great. And then the second thing is to follow up with, I think, Anna's point, I totally understand that we need to make it manageable, but if there's any way to include as many people in the process as possible, I definitely think that we want to, go out of the box to include people that maybe perhaps aren't our normal go-tos and that we don't normally include, and to make everybody feel that they have a voice and are part of the process, because it's a change for the community, and I think people will want to feel like their voice was heard. So as broad a group as we could muster, I think would be great. Just an opinion, less of a question.
Okay, anyone else? So, does anybody have an objection of not having voted on it next month?
I would like to see the decision from the state first,
Okay.
personally.
Okay, anyone else? Sure.
Dr. Rogers, you have no idea when the decision's coming down, right?
I don't. Obviously, I maintain good relations with the state association that I used to work for, and I've asked the staff there to track this issue for us, and obviously there are 60, 70 other districts in the state that are going through this as well. So this is a priority item for them. I'm sure as soon as there's a development to share, they'll let me know, and I will, of course, turn around and share it with you, too. The department, I believe, is going to adopt this at their April meeting, so their time is running somewhat short for this advisory group to have one or say two meetings before the Board of Regents adopts the final regulation. So I would anticipate that there's some pressure for them to move sooner rather than later. Also, we made the point to the State Association, and they shared that they had made the point to the department staff that school districts are going through budgeting season right now, and if we are to incorporate any of these costs into the budget that we're currently working on, we can't really delay decisions to the end of the school year because the budget process will have passed us by.
Is it possible to make the vote conditioned upon getting the decision, to say if we get the decision before the March meeting, we'll vote? Or is that not procedurally acceptable?
I think it's less about being a parliamentary question and more about making the decision when you're ready to set the chain of events in motion. Because I'm anticipating if you make the decision to retire the mascot, then the next step after that will be broad-scale public engagement. I think it would be confusing to start broad-scale public engagement with a contingent proposal to change the mascot.
Sorry, that's not what I meant. I meant, can we put it on the agenda to vote conditioned upon the decision coming down, and if the decision doesn't come down, then we can push it to another month? I didn't mean voting contingently. Does that make sense?
I understand that parliamentary question better. So you can certainly, we the administration prepare a resolution, a series of resolutions for you every month, but the resolutions we prepare are the administrative functions of the district. This obviously is a board function, so I feel it exceeds my authority to decide when you're going to vote on this. This is a decision only you can make. What I will say as a matter of parliamentary procedure, if you instruct us to put this resolution on your next agenda, any member of the board may vote to table an item that is on the agenda, and if you have a majority of the board agree with that motion to table, the item is tabled until the next month. So if it was on the agenda, that would be the parliamentary mechanism for neither voting for nor against it, but tabling it until a subsequent meeting.
Dr. Rogers? Sorry, Tom. I agree with Susan. I think that's the simplest way to do this. let's put it on for next month, assuming the decision's made, and if it's not, we'll table it.
I don't know if we're going to say we're going to table it. I think, again, I don't have a majority of people that are saying that they don't want to vote on it. So I keep asking the same question. You know, I'm proposing that we put it on for March to vote on it. Other than Anna, is anybody else against voting on it next month? Because, again, this is like the inevitable here.
Then what was the purpose of the advisory panel that the state putting together? In other words, I don't want us to face a scenario where at the end of their committee, they come up with a list of names, including Braves, that have a green light, let's say, hypothetically, and we vote to
retire.
Right. Not to mention, you know, I still maintain that for me personally, you know, the imagery and the name are two different separate things.
Yes.
That you know, so I am not, you know, again, being the only one, but I still maintain that I would like to see this before I'm ready to vote.
Go ahead.
I guess procedurally, if we put it on the agenda for March and somebody wanted to table it because the decision didn't come down, then we would have to vote at that time to table it.
Right, but you still need 5 votes.
At that time, but I'm saying we could have that vote in March.
Yeah.
So we don't. I think I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we don't have to vote now whether or not we would table it or we wouldn't. We can just put it on for March.
Correct.
And then in March, let's say if the decision didn't come down, Anna could say, I want to table it, and then everybody could vote then.
Yes. Right? Am I saying that right? Go ahead, please.
Just a quick thought. If we do that, which is fine, we can put it on for March and we could table it. The only thing is, then I would suggest not wasting any of your time or administration's time thinking about community input and how to go about getting that, because then in the event that we keep tabling it and we get to June and then we vote on it in June, we've now made it very difficult for the seniors this year to add input, and now it kind of changes the whole system. So I would say, in my opinion, to not start the idea of the committees and whatnot. In other words, no report to us next month about that. We're going to have to see what happens with this committee and whether or not we vote. Once we vote on it, then I think it's fair to say, let's start the process of how we want to put the committee together. Otherwise, there's no point. It's like wasted time.
Sorry. Okay. Respectfully, no matter what, we're going to have to change at least the mascot, right? Is that so? Even if we start planning, even if, I mean, I'm not saying what anyone wants or what anyone's voting for or who's comfortable with anything or anything else, putting plans in motion, we at least, there's at least one part, if not both parts, regardless of how everybody votes, that have to change. So if we put plans in motion or we start to plan, I don't think there's a downside to it, because I mean, that's how I feel.
I agree with Len. I think we should get started, Dr. Rogers.
It is the lighting. It is. Okay, so now we have some new business. A items is the approval for for staff changes. Can I have a motion, please? Brian, Shawnee? Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A2 is the approval of the 2022 and 2023 stipends and hourly rates. May I have a motion, please? Susan, seconded by Lisa. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A3 is the approval for coaching recommendations for our spring season. Can I have a motion, please? Lynn, seconded by Shawnee. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Now we move on to B items. Is the approval of the Committee on Special Education recommendations. Can I please have a motion? Anna, seconded by Lisa. Does anybody have any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B2, the approval on the Committee of Preschool Special Education. Can I have a motion, please? Lynn, seconded by Shawnee. Anybody have any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B3, approval of student club charters for the 2022-2023 year. Can I have a motion, please? Lisa, seconded by Anna. Does anybody have any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C items is the authorization for service contract. Can I have a motion, please? Susan, seconded by Lisa. Does anybody have any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C2, the authorization for special education and nursing contracts. Can I have a motion, please? Lynn, seconded by Shawnee. Does anybody have any questions? You okay? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C3 is the authorization for health and welfare services. Can I have a motion, please? Shawnee? Brian? Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C4 is the authorization for contracts for the federal Part B funds. Can I have a motion, please? Shawnee, seconded by Brian. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C5 is the acceptance of an award of the Nassau County Director of School Facilities Purchasing Consortium cooperative bid for the 2022-2023 school year. Can I have a motion, please? Susan, seconded by Anna. Does anybody have any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C6 is the authorization for piggybacking with the Bayshore Union Free School District. Can I have a motion, please? Shawnee, seconded by Lynn. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C7 are the acceptance of donations of a carpet and a router. Can I have a motion, please? Susan, seconded by Lisa. Any questions? All in favor? Brian, you don't have a question? Opposed? Any abstentions? C8 is the authorization for the disposal of broken, surplus, and/or obsolete equipment and/or books. Can I have a motion, please? Lynn, Brian. Any questions, Brian?
Yes. I can't answer. It was really nice to see that we finally disposed of an obsolete camcorder.
It was very hard to part company with that camcorder, but we did it.
Anyone else? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion to adjourn. Thank you. What? Wait, what? It's okay.